All right, welcome to episode four of the BrainFood podcast. Yep, that's it. It's complicated because I'm always editing the one previously, and then we're also planning the one next down the street, and it's kind of, where actually are we in the present day? But live in the present, Simon. Here we are, episode 4. Bit of a retro gaming episode today on all fronts, it seems. Mm-hmm. We've got our first interview with the Coles. More on that in a bit. We're starting with episode feedback, and in between all of that, we have our fact section today where we're talking basically a lot about Pong and kind of where Pong came from, how Pong came to be, and it's for a very simple game. It's got a really interesting story, so I think that'll be a lot of fun. Should we dive right into episode feedback from last time?
Oh, should we do a promo for next week's episode? I believe we'll be doing interview with Wheezy Waiter.
We will, Craig from Wheezy Waiter. I don't know if you can say Craig from Wheezy Waiter, because Wheezy Waiter is kind of his persona, isn't it? It'd be like saying, Simon from Simon Whistler, which is definitely weird. Yeah. But Craig, Wheezy Waiter, however you want to call him, we are interviewing him as we record this, I believe, on the Monday after next, but as you guys hear that'll be next week, so there you go. You're doing this right before your flight out to VidCon. I was kind of scheduling this, and then I was thinking, this must line up with something. Dave was like, I could do it till like 11:40, but then I really need to leave for the airport.
like if we're still talking at that point, I'll just go and you can continue the interview, because I have to leave like right then.
Where's your nearest airport?
It's actually about 45 minutes away, but it is a great airport because it's one of those where like no one goes to, so you walk in, and from like the point you walk in the door to the point when you're ready to get on the plane is like 5 minutes, including going through security, like every time. It's awesome.
I'm a huge, like, people talk about big airports. I'm like, the smaller the airport the better, because you can get in, you can get out. You're also, huge airports are far away from places because there's a huge number of planes going overhead. Like there's an airport in London called City Airport, which basically just serves like small planes in the center of London. This is the most convenient one. It's in the center of London. You can go out to Heathrow, but it'll take you 45 minutes on the underground. Even longer, maybe. I'm not sure. Maybe much longer.
Did we say what the Coles interview was for those who don't know who the Coles are?
We did not. We probably should do that. Do you want to?
I can. The Coles are the makers of the great games, the Quest for Glory series, and they have a new game coming out finally after like, I don't know, 15 years maybe or so since the last Quest for Glory that they've worked in it. It's looking good so far. And they also, they're going to talk about, some of the early days of Sierra, how to do a successful Kickstarter campaign, lots and lots of input on how to become like a computer programmer for gaming, and like some tips and stuff that they've learned along the way. It was a really great interview, I thought.
We should definitely point out here that, we basically decided that the practical knowledge section, where we normally talk about various things that, if we had a successful Kickstarter, we could talk about having a successful Kickstarter, but as we have not done that ever.
And they have a very, very successful Kickstarter.
To the tune of over $400,000, which is pretty damn wild. Yeah, that will be replacing the practical knowledge section. I think when we do interviews, largely that will be the case, because no one wants a 4-hour podcast. Or maybe people do want a 4-hour podcast. If you do want a 4-hour podcast, don't forget we have forum where you can discuss things happening on the podcast. See it kind of like YouTube comments for podcasts without the dicks. Forums.todayIfoundout.com. Or just go to todayifoundout.com and click on the forums button in the title bar. So that's the Coles. That's coming up later in this episode. We got Wheezy Waiter coming up the week after next. So we'll have a regular practical knowledge episode next week. Wheezy Waiter the week after that. And all sorts of good interviews coming up in the future, which we haven't yet arranged. So I'm assuming they'll be good. Strong plug there for future episodes.
We did have... we have like Carl and
of course.
To talk about.
We do have Carl,
the lawyer guy, to talk about trademark and copyright law as it pertains to podcasting and YouTube, which is, I've seen his talk on this. It's quite good.
Yes. You saw that at PodCon, right?
Yeah, I did.
Are you going to all these conferences? I'm looking forward to VidCon. Give us a review on iTunes. Make it good if you want. Make it bad if you don't, or just make it.
If it's bad, you could always just go to the forum and tell us there.
Yeah, then we can reply. Wait, that's not selling it. Main bit of feedback from this time to last time, I think, was anyone. It's always complicated when you record these out of order, but if you're listening to this, you will have listened to past week's episode, which I haven't finished even editing yet, so that's weird in my mind. But there are no more whistling transitions. We did away with them because everyone hates them.
They sound really good when I listen to them on my phone or headphones, but apparently they must like ear pierce people in other headphones.
I think so. I think it's maybe just a bit sharp for some people. It happens. There are some people, and maybe it's to my detriment to point this out, but sibilance or sibilance or however you want to call it, which is this sound you hear when people speak. Some people are really sensitive to that, and so every now and again you're getting, especially when I was doing the podcast, my previous podcast, people go, "Oh, it's impossible to listen to with a and anyone I ask, anyone else is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But there are some people who are very sensitive to this sibilance or whatever it's called. So yeah, I generally don't do anything about that because it's a problem for 99% of, it's not a problem for 99.9% of people, and it's a pain in the ass to remove. So yes, I'm sorry.
I should note that my 286S there that I was telling you about does in fact have a sibilance remover automatically. You can.
There you go.
I don't have it turned on, but it has it.
Audition has one which you can do it in post, but it's not particularly good. So I'm wondering if yours is actually better.
Well, yeah, it kind of like ruins the audio in other ways if it's turned on too much.
Yes, this is exactly it. It makes it sound. This is a problem with anything. It's like, can't you remove those trucks going past in the background? And it's like, yes, not that there are trucks going past in the background, but it does. If you up the noise reduction, eventually it just sounds like you're underwater. It's quite. Maybe I could put it in a little in the post. This bit of me talking now is heavily noise reduced, and you can hear it sounds really terrible.
That leads us well into why we have not filmed ourselves yet.
Could talk a bit about I apologize. I'm drinking a coffee which I did not put sugar in, but is sweet. Very strange. I get the feeling they must have handed me someone else's coffee that they'd already made, and we're like,
or it's all the fumes you've been sniffing today with the wood floor refinish.
Yeah. Just before we recorded our story, and I'm having I got a new apartment like a few months ago, and the floors hadn't been. They're like these old wooden floors. It's like this old apartment, and they were in pretty bad condition. So we had those guys who come in and sand it all down and then put like the polish on top. So my entire apartment smells like polish and dust, and I think I'm going to get brain disease from the fumes, and I'm going to get lung disease from the tiny wood particulates that are floating. Everything. They sealed off the room that they were doing, and it's still like there is wood dust on everything. So yeah, maybe I've got a brain tumor or something from all of that, and it's making me taste things wrong. Yeah, so we could talk about the camera issue. Technical difficulties for one. I think the biggest technical difficulty, Simon hasn't yet ordered a camera and
well, to be fair, your GH4, unlike mine, because of the tax thing, only will stop recording after 30 minutes. So you have to.
This is a wonderful thing that Americans, that I'm not sure what it is. I haven't looked into this, but my understanding is there's some sort of VAT or sales tax law that basically differentiates still cameras from video cameras. Now, most YouTubers are shooting on still cameras, but the problem is if you buy it within the EU, it's capped at, I think it's 21 minutes or half an hour. Mine does 21 minutes, but then another camera I have does half an hour. So I think the actual law might be 30 minutes, and then some do less than that for whatever reason. But basically this means like if we're filming an episode, you can leave your GH4 running for like the full time, whereas mine stops every 21 minutes, which you might think, fine, just press record like after 21 minutes. But syncing that up afterwards is a task that will make you want to throw yourself out of a window.
Well, and you never remember to do it when you're in the middle of having a conversation. You're like, oh wait, it stopped like 10 minutes ago.
You're right. Though I told you, I don't know if people who are listening are aware, but I also have another channel called Visual Politic, and we went for this to go and interview the Prince of Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein's like a small country in Europe, and we had like one main camera, and this could do, it was a video camera, so it could continue rolling. But then we had like 3 other cameras which were shooting different angles, and they were all European SLRs. So every 15 minutes, the production guys, the 2 partners on the channel who are doing like the filming of me interviewing the guy, are like running around and hitting all the record buttons again, and I'm like, this looks professional. Yeah. So that's a technical difficulty, and also there's another problem. Well, the problem is we edit this a lot. I think someone asked in the comments, and it was like the first episode had roughly 1,600 edits. Now they have more because I worked out there's an amazing feature in Audition which lets you delete silence or shorten silence. So when we pause, it will just automatically remove it, and it won't be so it sounds like ba 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 and really weird. It'll just take like 100 milliseconds of silence and shorten it to 25. So it just basically punches everything up.
Well, and that's actually kind of important too, because we have this like 1 second delay between when I hear what you say and when you hear what I say as well. So yes, it's kind of that's a problem.
Okay, so this leads on to 2 problems. The first problem is when you've got that, when you're doing that with audio, no one can tell. When you're doing that with video, it starts looking like you've got crazy jump cuts every second, because it's like, there'll be a little edit every 4 or 5 seconds. And so there'll be just, and it looks really stuttery. Another problem, which I don't think I've told you yet, is this would mean, because we'd be doing video, we'd have to do it in Premiere, and which is Adobe Suite's video editing program, which doesn't have this kind of feature, because otherwise they wouldn't get you to buy the Audition program. So I'm yet to work out whether this is actually something we can do without having to go through and do those 500 edits per section myself, or having a producer do this.
Speaking of that, if anyone is a producer of this sort of content and wishes to perhaps join us, you can email us at podcast@todayifoundout.com.
Drop us an email, podcast@todayifoundout.com, if you would be interested in doing something like that. Another thing I wanted to just mention with the whole camera and the thing, I think we're kind of doing a Q&A question here, but it's Alex Pope, and he says, why not put a camera in the room for the YouTube viewers? The second thing is, go and listen on iTunes. Stop watching it on YouTube and go and listen on iTunes, because it ran review 5 stars, because it really sounds.
It massively, because iTunes, I don't know if people are aware, they have this like new and noteworthy thing, and that is so huge for propelling a podcast to actually, be somewhat successful. Like we get a lot of downloads compared to most people starting out, of course, but you still, like, that just takes it to the next level where, you can actually monetize it and not just have it be a big money sink, basically.
We like to avoid those. Yeah, if you can, don't watch the visualization of this that you're probably watching, and go over to your phone and subscribe. Enough of that. I think we've plugged this enough. Someone says we should start a Discord community. Are you
Demosthenes?
Yeah, I was just going to not even try on that one. Demosthenes asks about the Discord community. I only know Discord communities because I previously mentioned on the weekend I sometimes play Grand Theft Auto 5 with some friends. We have a Discord community which we use for text chat and audio chat while we play. I'm not really sure how that works for a podcast. Do we start a Discord community and people can...
I've never even heard of it before but it's been suggested a few times in the comments now, so I thought.
It sounds like we've got a community. Check out our special community. It's nice. It's more of a forum, which I think is maybe, from my experience with Discord, that's more of a chat, whereas the forum is more of a forum. So we think it's probably better for this. So do go check that out. I got a good story with Discord. I was sitting at my computer, just working away. And then my headphones are sitting on the desk and I hear someone. They're like, hello, Simon. And I'm like, what? Did I accidentally call someone? Like, what's going on? Who is this? And it's like, it's Grant. And I'm like, hey, Grant, how are you talking to me right now? And he's like, you've been signed into Discord for 4 days. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It was in the system tray. But apparently that means the microphone and the speakers are still on. No one was in there. But anyone over those last 4 days could have just been listening to what I'm up to in my office the whole time. Because apparently I was broadcasting that.
It's hilarious because what you're up to a lot is talking and recording.
Right. People would just hear me like screwing up pronunciations and recording videos. Yeah, so that's Discord. I think we're going to stick with the forum, forums.todayifoundout.com for now. So go check that out if you want some interaction.
Some Clint notes we should bring back, to quote, bring back the chick on the treadmill.
Yes, the chick on the treadmill.
No, that was a one-time only joke. It was.
Yeah, it would get tired. There are different chicks on treadmills that you can buy on Big Stock Video, though.
And there were several people suggesting, a shirtless man running on a treadmill. We could mix it up.
Yeah, we could. All of those things. I think I did that visualizer last time, which people probably prefer. But I mean,
yeah, because it is when you're just watching it in the background. Perhaps it might be a little weird if other people are around and they're like, "Why are you watching a woman running on a treadmill?"
I was thinking about like people watching on or listening around the house on Google Chromecast or something, and it's like, that could get annoying.
Your monitor speakers? Did you mention?
Monitor speakers. So this is kind of related to the whistling transitions. I bought what are called monitor speakers, which is confusing because to me a monitor is something that you look at your screen. It's the visual aspect of the computer. But monitor speakers are essentially speakers that don't really have any additional, they don't add any bass or treble. They don't try to change the music to make it more appealing to your ears. They just make an accurate representation of what the sound is. So the idea behind these is when I'm editing this in Audition, now I can really tell when the whistling is too sharp and all of these things because it just makes this very accurate reproduction of the sound. So from now on, balance should be better. There should be less sharp things. It should just be a better sounding podcast as well. So yes, that's all good.
Do we also want to talk about the upcoming podcast?
We should. We've mostly talked about this through email. Is it erudition? Is that the pronunciation on that?
That's how I would pronounce it.
Okay,
I've actually never looked up the proper, but
what is it?
It was.
That's what we're calling it. What does it mean?
Yeah, it is a uncommon knowledge about something like, or let me look it up here. The quality of having or showing great knowledge or learning, scholarship.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the erudition podcast. A little bit about that. Basically, we are, a lot of people mention that they like listening to Today I Found Out. We've mentioned previously that, listening on YouTube is a painful experience because, one, it's a huge data hog. Two, if you turn off your phone, it will it will stop playing the audio. So we're just going to take some Today I Found Out episodes and put them into a podcast-like format.
Yeah, and probably about, probably 30 to 60 minutes per episode, but it'll probably be like a week's worth of content. Right now, the holdup is primarily because we realized the music might be a little annoying listening to for a whole hour straight. So we need to go back to the original files and cut it out.
Yes. It is painful, but we'll figure it out. That is largely my holdup because I haven't done that yet.
With all your free time.
Yeah, with all, the last 2 calls, I've been eating as we've started the call. As this one, I'm finishing off like a croissant that I picked up on the way to the office, and the last one we did, I had a slice of pizza for dinner. So this is an idea of my time-saving methods. I often also work when I'm on the toilet. Pong. It's a game. Like tennis, but on the computer. In my mind, this was the first game ever made, but having read the brief for today's episode, I see that that's not true at all.
It was at least it's considered to be, people say the first commercially successful game, which also isn't quite, or electronic game. It's not quite accurate because there were plenty of companies making money on like these sorts of things before, but this one was the first one where it's just like massively popular, pretty much worldwide, and sort of took the gaming industry from sort of a niche thing that was a little bit associated with gambling and stuff like that, which we'll get into in a little bit, some of the negative perception, and took it and moved it into the mainstream. And like this was sort of the moment, like, 1972, when the gaming industry, the electronic gaming industry, just took off. And Pong was the sort of the instigator of it.
It's fascinating because, we're going to get into this whole thing today. But if someone asked me, if there was like a who wants to be a millionaire question about Pong, and this wouldn't really work as Who Wants to Be a Millionaire because it's not really a single answer. But if someone was like, how did Pong come about? The story that I would be relatively confident about in my mind is like, it was accidentally invented by like a company trying to make a word processor or whatever. And then it became the first game and people loved it. And that's why we have computer games. But that's a complete myth.
There's like an element of the accidental. I mean, depending on your exact definition of accidental.
Yeah. But we'll get into all of this. Yeah.
Yeah. So 1972. It was Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, he's the one often not talked about a little bit because, or at least according to Dabney, is Bushnell had his way of just promoting himself later on and acting like he did everything. So you can choose to believe who you choose to believe on that one.
That doesn't sound familiar through any, from any other computer technology companies, right? It's not a familiar story at all.
Yeah. But anyways, the pair, they had just created this game known as Computer Space, which was a complete ripoff of another game called Space War. It was just, and they put it in sort of an arcade format, and they were quite young, didn't really have the financing, so they went to a company called Nutting Associates to produce the game, actually make the game and sell it, and they ended up selling about 1,000 units of it, which by the spring of 1972, so by the standards of the day, that was really successful, but Nutting had actually thought it would do a lot better.
1,000 units doesn't sound like, I'm on the App Store, and it'll be like 2.4 million downloads. I've never even heard of this app, and this is like the best-selling game of. It
wasn't the best-selling, but that was a quite successful by those standards. And you have to, these cabinets, these arcade cabinets, I don't know what they were charging for them, but if I remember correctly, Nolan Bushnell said he made something like $1.5 million or something off of this.
Wow.
So okay. They weren't cheap. They were.
So we're talking.
Selling them.
That's $1,500 profit per unit in $1970.
Yeah, it was a success in that, but on the other hand, it was kind of considered a failure by the Nutting Associates. So this caused a lot of tension between them and Bushnell and Dabney. And eventually Bushnell and Dabney were just like, enough, we're gonna go do this on our own. And I love this. There's this quote from Bushnell, and he was noting that despite his inexperience at running a company, like he didn't know what he was doing, didn't know how to make these things, other than to design the actual circuitry and stuff. And he said he figured he could do it as, to quote, "I couldn't screw it up more than they did."
So Nutting Associates, in this case, they're not like a firm giving them money. They're like a real, because...
Yeah, they were... I think they made things like coin-operated machines, like so you had like pinball and stuff like that around that time. And so I think they made stuff like that. So it was like a natural fit to, all right, here's this game we made, Computer Space, which is completely ripping off this other game, but whatever, we don't care. Would you just make it and sell it, handle the distribution and making of the actual units?
Ripping off other games is going to be a strong theme throughout today's episode.
Yeah, that is that. And in the early days of the industry, that was just what everyone did. So rip off what everyone else is doing, and then don't worry about patents or who cares about that. That was just the way of things.
Right. And because when we talk like 1,000 units, it's a real box, like a big machine that people, it's not like an app where you can, I don't want to, diminish the what it takes to make an app, but at least that's just lines of code. Here you're talking about, and we'll get into this a bit later, but like you need, like you say, that coin machine that you put things into, and you need like a screen, and you need like a control pad and a big wooden box and delivery, and it's complicated.
Yeah. So in June of 1972, after they broke away from Nutting Associates, they decided to officially form their company, which I believe this is pronounced Syzygy, is that how you would do it? Syzygy Engineering?
That is far too many consonants without any vowels. S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y. Yeah, I'd go for Syzygy.
So yeah, apparently
this was like the equivalent of like a Silicon Valley company. How they'll go through these things. So it'll be like everything was like, Screenio or Cupio or Keyboardio for a while. Do you think this was their equivalent of like just...
Yeah, or they have that website that automatically generates random Web 2.0 names for that term.
Yeah.
And I actually used one of those to create a company name once.
Seriously?
Yeah, called Dazzleblab, which was my first company.
Dazzleblab.
Yeah, mildly successful.
Let's go back to the 1970s.
All right, so Syzygy Engineering, which Syzygy is apparently an astronomy term, means 3 or more celestial bodies lined up in a given gravitational system. And apparently occasionally sometimes people will use it if all the planets are on like one side of the sun at the same time. They might call that, but...
So they called their company an unpronounceable name, and then they decided to make it like named after a term that's a little bit complicated and not really sure what it means. Good job, guys.
Yeah, exactly. So then when they had been using this name for a few years back from when they first came up with that other game, so they'd never actually made an official company, though, register with the state and everything. So then they tried to do it, and they found out someone else had already named their company that. So they ended up, according
it's
to
a
Dabney,
really obvious name to choose, so I'm not surprised that someone had already taken that.
So according to Dabney, they then submitted 3 names to the California Secretary of State office, and it was Hain, Senti, and Atari. And just for whatever reason, whoever filed the paperwork chose Atari, and so that became their official company name. And I guess all 3 of those are from the game Go. I'm not really familiar with that game. Are you?
I've not played. A friend of mine at university used to play a lot, but
I know the Atari one definitely is, but the other 3 I'd never heard.
No, never
before,
heard of them.
But so from that point, they needed someone to work for them, so they hired a 24-year-old reasonably fresh out of college named Alan Alcorn. And Bushnell, they'd actually previously worked with him at a company called Ampex, so they knew he was good, but he had never actually designed any games or worked on anything like that. And so they kind of wanted to give him a softball start, so they had a contract with this company called Bally Manufacturing, who made like pinball games and stuff like we were talking about before. And
I know. Do they still make pinball machines? This is familiar. I love pinball. It's familiar to me.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if they're still around, or maybe just like the classic machines or whatever. But yeah, so they had a contract with them to make a driving game, like where you drive around or whatever, but they thought this would be way too complicated for a first go, because Alcorn, he had fresh out of college electrical engineering and some computer science background, but he'd never actually made a game, so that we'll give him something easy. So as we'll get into later a little bit, the Bushnell had just been to a little conference where he looked, and Magnavox had this table tennis game, right? Electronic table tennis. And so he was just like, hey,
who's Magnavox?
It's just a different company. They were a big company. I think they're still around, reasonably big, but maybe not. I don't know.
Magnavox is a cool name.
Yeah, they used to make like TVs and, DVD players and stuff. I'm sure they were still around, probably.
So just a big company that had already made something like really super similar.
Yeah, so he was just like, hey, that looked simple. here, you make this. But he wanted him to take the job seriously. So he said, all right, so we actually have a contract with GE and they want an electronic table tennis
You're like
game.
General Electric.
So, yeah. So
did they?
No, they just wanted him to take it seriously, see what he would do. And they said, real simple, he just needs 2 paddles, one moving spot for the ball to, move around back and forth, and then have a digits to display the score. That was his only guidelines according to Alcorn.
I love these guys' attitude to business. Like, here, we'd like you to make a game just to test it out that is really similar to this other game, but not too similar. Yeah. And we're making it for General Electric.
Yeah, it totally.
Why would General Electric want this?
Well, and that's what he said when he first made the little prototype exactly to their specifications, and he was like, "This is really boring." Like, so he thought, "I'll spruce it up a little. I'll make it so when the ball hits a different part of the paddle, it'll go off in different angles, so that'd make it a little more fun." And then
it'd be pretty easy if it wasn't doing all that, because the crazy angle stuff and that speed that it gets up is the part that makes it kind of fun.
Yeah, exactly. And so then he also said, okay, and also it needs to speed up, like you just said. So as you return it, it's got to go faster and faster and make it harder and harder. And then another, I love this, is the old it's not a bug, it's a feature thing.
Yes.
So the screen, if anyone who's played the classic, I don't know if it's like this on more modern versions, but the classic version on Atari, and I remember this distinctly, was you would go up to the corners and you couldn't actually get to the very corner, but the ball could go through there. So it was like a place you couldn't move the paddles. And so the circuit, it was just kind of a bug in his circuit. And do you want to read the quote from him about this little thing?
Yes, I do. One of my lessons learned is that if you can't fix it, call it a feature. The paddles on the original Pong didn't go all the way to the top. There was a defect in the circuit. I used a very simple circuit. I had to make the paddles, but they didn't go to the top. But it turned out to be important because if you get 2 good players, they could just volley and play the game forever. And the game has to end in about 3 or 4 minutes, otherwise it's a failure as a game. So that gap at the top, again, a feature, was a sort of happy accident. And I was playing some Pong in preparation for today's episode. The version I found, which is probably the one when you Google Play Pong, you activate your Flash player, and the paddles went all the way to the top, so they got rid of this feature. So,
did you ever play a game that had that on there?
I think I must have done back in the day.
Yeah, I remember on the old original Atari. But yeah, then after he made this, there's been a few months past, and they were like, and so they thought, well, he needs some experience with sound, so doing sound on it. So they told him it had to have cheering and booing sound effects every time someone scored, or the stuff like that.
Wow, that would drive me nuts. That would be fun for the first 3. And then you'd be like, please stop.
Exactly. And Alcorn was like, fortunately for all of us, as you say, he didn't know how to make sounds. So he has another great quote on this one.
God bless you, Alcorn. Your lack of sound knowledge. Okay, the quote. This is Alcorn again. Cheers, applause. How did you do that with digital circuits? 1s and 0s. I had no idea. So I went in there that afternoon and in less than an hour poked around and found different tones that already existed in the sync generator and gated them out, and it took half a trip to do that. And I said, there's the sound. If you don't like it, you do it. Oh, okay. There's the sound. If you don't like it, you do it. There was a comma missing in the quote, and I just added it. That's the way it was. So I love it when people talk about how wonderful and well thought out the sounds are. So it's a feature, not a bug, again.
Yeah, so despite the fact that at this point, I mean, Bushnell knew good and well where the original idea came from. Now, granted, the Magnavox version was a boring, didn't have these features that Alcorn had put in to make it actually fun. But so despite the fact it was supposed to be a test, thing, he just, warm up for him to get used to making games and all that. And he knew Magnavox already had a game exactly like that, and a patent on it, by the way. He was like, oh, this might actually be him and Dad, and he were like, this could work. This is kind of fun. So let's test it out. So they had been doing pinball repair over at some various places around, and some stuff like that, different coin operated machines on the side to sort of just generate some income in the meantime. And so
who had been their company?
Yeah, Atari. That's what they kind of did a little bit.
It's such a curious thing, like, to imagine Atari back in the day. And it's like, what did you do on the site? Well, we were sort of making games and fixing pinball machines.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same computer. There's circuitry in there that needs repaired, and similar coin operated machines. So it's right up their alley. Yeah. So you had this Andy Cap's Tavern, and they they put the prototype in, and this prototype was just like so ghetto, all hand wired. They made it with like some plywood. They went out and bought a random TV, which it was like $75 Hitachi TV, which was about $445 today, black and white, and then just they pulled a coin operated mechanism from a laundromat, machine, and then they put a milk jug underneath to collect the coins inside the
sounds secure,
thing.
yeah,
and they just put one instruction on the thing, which just said avoid missing ball for high score. And so and they figured if it worked out, they had a contract with Bally to make that driver game, as mentioned. If it worked out, they could just pitch it and say, hey, how about this game instead, and then move on to something else. Or Midway Manufacturing, which is a similar company to Bally, they could just
can you imagine that? So guys, we know you asked us to make a driving game. Instead,
and paid partially for a driving game.
Instead, we've just been fussing around, training up our engineer on your dime, and he made this Pong game. Right? Do you want that instead? Maybe. Sketchy.
Yeah. So initially, both companies were quite interested in the game because he was pitching it. But however, within a week, the game started malfunctioning, and so they went out to go see what was up, and it turned out
it was like knocked together from like, what did you say, like an old TV they picked up, a milk jug, a coin operated thing from a laundromat.
Exactly, and it turned out the coin operated part was the malfunction, but it was because the inside had become so full of coins that they'd piled up to start short circuiting things out, and so it was like so popular. And the manager of the tavern was like, yeah, people are lining up even before I open just to come in and play this game. And so Bushnell was like, whoa, let's rethink maybe giving this game away or selling this game or whatever. So he was like, let's do this ourselves, even though they'd never manufactured themselves like actual mass produced hardware to send out other than the prototypes and stuff. And they had no money to hire anyone really, what they need, no equipment. And
So this is again playing out for them really nicely because they didn't make that driving game as they were instructed to do. They can also be like, this isn't what we made for you. So this is just something else.
And now we're not going to give it to you anyway. Right. We want to keep it for ourselves. So that was a problem. The money was a problem because at the time this was coin operated machines, especially like pinball and like these sorts of things were considered like a form of gambling, and they were illegal quite a bit throughout the U.S. just because it was supposedly a games of chance rather than.
I think we did a video about this, didn't we? And the guy who plays the pinball in the court to show that it's a game of skill. That was awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And this was 4 years later in 1976 in New York when he played that game and called his shot. He sort of, for those who don't know the story, he basically was in front of all these reporters and city council members, and he was there. He got hired to prove that pinball was not a game of chance but a game of skill instead, and so it wasn't a form of gambling because it was illegal at the time in New York and many other places in the U.S.
Gambling.
So gambling,
not pinball.
Pinball. Yeah,
but pinball was illegal by proxy because it was used for gambling.
No, it was considered gambling because it was considered completely game of chance.
A game of chance. But what if you're not putting money on it?
I don't know. I assume maybe people did put money on it. I mean, you bet with friends or something, when you're like, hey, I can get a higher score than you or whatever. But this was a thing all the way back.
That doesn't make sense. If it was illegal because people were gambling on it, but that would be like playing poker is illegal because it's gambling. But what if you're just playing poker for fun?
It was clearly taverns still had these, but there's all these records of like police raids and stuff where they're going and like confiscating the pinball machines. And it wasn't just pinball, there was coin operated machines in general. They had sort of a bad reputation. So banks didn't want to give loans, especially to a new company who doesn't really have, a lot of stuff.
Risky.
So it was a little sketchy. So yeah, the guy, what was his name here? Roger Sharp. So he's there in the court or in the room, all the media there, and the politicians are not buying it. They're like, no, you've rigged this machine. That's how come you're playing so well. And so he finally just gets fed up, and he's like, after they switch machines to a different machine just to see like, oh, you rigged the first one or whatever. And he finally says, all right, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to launch the ball, and then I'm going to hit it with the paddle, and it's going to go right through the center thing. So he's just calling a shot. And he did it. He launched it. He did it. And it went right through, and then they finally backtracked and, all right, pinball, it's fine. We'll no longer consider it. It's now a game of skill, not chance. And so that was sort of the kickoff of this sort of, these are no longer maybe, coin operating machines started to get a little better reputation after that. But at this point, in 1972, 4 years earlier, it had this bad reputation, so it was really hard. Atari had trouble finding loans until finally Wells Fargo gave them a line of credit. But then they had the other problem, which you mentioned, is so they had this contract with Bally, and I think they might have had a different contract with Midway, but I can't remember exactly. But Bally, they definitely, and they didn't want to give it to them anymore. Like if Bally would say, yeah, we they had already pitched it to them, and Bally was interested, and now they're like, no, we want to keep it. So how do you do that while still maintaining a good relationship with Bally and Midway in the future?
I'm like, you could probably get out of that legally, but it's not going to be good for business.
Yeah, and they needed that business because Bally and Midway were two of the biggest, like the corn operated things. So they wanted to keep that. So according to Bushnell, anyway, and again, Dabney sometimes says Bushnell exaggerates things. So Bushnell says that he basically convinced them. He kind of started downplaying it, and then he says, Midway, oh, Bally's not interested anymore. Do you guys want it still? Kind of like that. And then he goes to the other and does the same things. Like, yeah, they don't want it anymore. Are you still interested? Just like,
it seems so transparent, but it's like,
yeah, your competitor's not interested because it's a dumb game. I don't, you don't want it, do you? Yeah. And so apparently this worked. And
wow.
And so both companies backed off, and so he could keep his good relationship. Well, now Atari was in the position to actually start pushing the game themselves. And so, yeah, they got the funding from Wells Fargo eventually, and they had some issues with they went to the unemployment lines and just started hiring random people to wire up these circuits, which isn't necessarily the best idea in the world, who people have no experience necessarily with wiring circuits. And so the first run had a lot of problems, but then they worked out their technical difficulties, and then these machines just started selling like crazy in the US and then in the world. And they were pulling in, which at the time was an unprecedented $40 per day, which is about $225 in today's dollars per machine, just as they were sending them out. So they were very quickly profitable for these companies buying them.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and so Atari was just making them as fast as they could, shipping them out. And then they took it to the next step when they came up with the home version of Pong, which you could play on your own TV at home. And they sold in the first Christmas, so they sold exclusively through Sears Sporting Goods. It was just, they sold 150. Yeah, 150.
Sears is like what is Sears?
At Sears, it's like clothing. They do tools. You just kind of a general.
But it's like a department store.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And they're kind of going out of business now, but they had been around forever, and they were huge back then. So
sport, it just it seems so strange, like just to be sold in like sporting goods.
Yeah, so it was 150,000 units the first Christmas. So naturally, Atari was doing well at this point. The problem, though, is, as everyone might have already thought of, is Magnavox is still there going like, wait a minute, guys.
The guys who had the super similar game.
Yeah, you saw this game. We know you saw this game. You played this game from us, and then a few months later, magically, you come out with this game.
How do they know?
Version of it. Well, yeah, because they had actually, at the thing, there was even a register where they signed. You have to sign like when you're testing the games and stuff, and there was Bushnell's signature, and then witnesses. He talked to them, and all in the industry.
It's like, you came for several meetings with our company about testing this game,
and then literally like 3 or 4 months later, you come out with your own version.
Yeah,
it's a massive hit. Yeah.
What were Magnavox doing with the game? That it made it to market?
They had their Magnavox Odyssey, which was really like it had the potential to be the Atari. Like everyone now knows Atari and then Nintendo and stuff. Magnavox Odyssey was way ahead of its time. It was made by a guy named Ralph Baer, which some people may have heard of him. He's sort of like considered the father of gaming, electronic gaming, because he created stuff like, besides he created that table tennis game, he created the Magnavox Odyssey. He was involved in, he created the first light gun, sort of like the one that Nintendo later used for Duck Hunt. He also created the game Simon, with the little pattern matching, where you hit have you ever played that game?
No. I feel like I should. I've played Simon Says, another game named after myself.
So the original is just like, it's got these 4 squares around it that light up. I don't know if the original actually light up, or they must have, I guess. So it lights up in a pattern and makes a sound, and then you have to press the buttons in that pattern, and then it gets progressively more and more complicated.
If I haven't played the specific game named Simon, I've played something super similar to this.
Yeah, there's lots of derivatives since, but yeah. So he did all this, and it was Magnavox that eventually bought the rights, I think, to this from him, because he actually did it.
As an aside here, Magnavox, glorious names of it, like Magnavox Odyssey. Yeah. It's like, could you think of a better name for it? They should bring back majestic product names.
Yeah,
what's this? The Xbox One, the Xbox Odyssey.
Ralph Baer and his, before it was Magnavox, I think they called it like the Brown Box, or it was the Brown something. It was something like just the Brown Box.
Yeah.
So a little bit more like Xbox.
Much more 21st century.
I think it had something to do with I can't remember, something about like they had brown tape wrapped around the original like prototype or something, so they just called it like the Brown Box. It was something like that. Magnavox acquired the rights to his stuff, and he was, and I think it was actually Bear who was encouraging, like, hey guys, you need to go and sue these people. They're copying what we're doing. And I think maybe because everyone did that at that point, they didn't care as much, but eventually they did. And this was obviously a problem for Atari because this was their product. That was the only thing making them money. And if they lost that in court, it was just like, okay, and we're probably gonna have to pay this massive fine.
And Magnavox had a patent on this, right?
Yeah, it was originally, I think, Ralph Baer's patent, and they acquired the rights to it, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it was it was because there had been previous these electronic table tennis games out, so there was some sort of argument for Atari to say, hey, there's prior art here, and Nintendo would later make that argument when they attempted to push that, when Magnavox tried to sue them for the similar thing. And Nintendo actually lost, but Atari was like, we can't risk the loss, and we might win because of the prior art, but we might not. And so they ended up settling out of court with Magnavox, and Magnavox also wasn't sure they were going to win this either, so they gave him pretty favorable terms. It was like, so the first thing, Atari had to pay him $700,000, which is about $3.2 million today for just it's a straight license, not, if I remember correctly, it was not a royalty base, so it was just a one-time fee, which was good. On the plus side for Atari, Magnavox then agreed that they would go after everybody copying Pong, which there was tons because that's what everyone did. So they would go after all of the copycats and sue them, and then or make them pay super high royalties so that Atari could sell theirs for less, and it also eliminate a lot of Atari's competition, which was great.
That is, when I was reading through the outline, I didn't quite understand that. That is super smart.
Yeah, so that was
Atari basically handle all of the sales of their product at whatever price they want, while this Magnavox company are like, we're just going to get rid of the competition by suing them all. We get the money from suing them, and you don't have competition.
Yeah.
That's a genius business move.
Yeah, there was one more stipulation, though, that was more, it was also Magnavox kind of, I assume they must have known what Atari would do with this stipulation, because they basically said, okay, but now for 1 year, Atari, everything you put out, everything you sell to customers, all the new stuff, I should say, the new product you put out, we get the rights to that. So it's ours. It's just ours after everything.
This is not going to end well for them.
It's not like they weren't developing stuff, but they did it kind of in secret, and so the Atari or Magnavox representatives would come by and be like, hey, what you working on? Why aren't you putting stuff out? And they would just kind of give them the runaround. I don't know.
What
we're
did
having
they
lots
expect?
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking Magnavox had to know this was what they would do, but at the same time, it still kind of works out for Magnavox because they have their competing product in the Odyssey, which is way ahead of its time. And so maybe it takes Atari out of the game for a year, gives Magnavox a chance.
This is probably exactly right, and that's a genius move because they could probably, they wouldn't have a chance of having something like, we need you to stop this company operating for a year, because it'll be, you have to fire all the people. That's terrible for the economy. It's terrible for business. It's really onerous, like, for a court to do that, because then it's going to be like, whoa, you can just stop a company operating for a year. So they basically did the next best thing. And they were like, we know exactly what is going on. They can't have been that stupid.
Exactly. It takes Atari out of the game. So it's a win for them. And it was great because the contract here for when the period would end, when Atari was allowed to start putting out stuff and actually keeping the rights to it, was 1 week before the Consumer Electronics Show, the annual, major Consumer Electronics Show. And so you had to know, Atari probably was like, yeah, let's get this contract signed so that when this period is up, we can suddenly debut all this stuff we worked on in that 1 week.
Hold on. So they were really, that must be quite interesting. So it's like a week later at CES, and they're like, we developed all of this stuff in the last 6 days. Amazing, I know.
And it was all this major launch because we've been working on stuff for a year. So, we got a lot of new stuff coming out.
But they couldn't have said that, because anything that they made would go to Magnavox.
Yeah,
so they must have been like, we didn't make anything. Honestly, guys, we really didn't.
Well, I was wondering if the exact contract might have been like anything you put out, so they could say, as long as we don't put it out. But they did have, like they said, they had the Magnavox people coming by regularly, like saying, hey guys, what are you working on? Why aren't you putting something out, So
it's just like dudes sitting on beanbags playing old games. Or anytime they come around, they're like, quick, put away the computers.
And I love this because you see this so much in like the, you have like Apple and, Microsoft, and they're all doing this stuff over the next couple decades where they're just total business shenanigans. Just, I don't know, let's just see what happens. We'll do it this way. And so this was just the tip of the iceberg. Atari, another one of their great ones, was so not long after they released Pong, they decided to start a separate company called Key Games. And so and it would be a competitor to themselves. And so you
Why?
think like, yeah, exactly. Why would you have a competitor to yourself? Like, wouldn't that drive down prices? But the point is so many of these coin operated businesses, what they wanted was so the companies they were selling them to wanted exclusive contracts. So we get your game, we get that game, but no one else gets that game.
The taverns or
yeah, exactly. Like these companies that were buying, that would put the machines in their establishments. They wanted exclusive contracts. So we get this game, and our competitor can't have this game. So people will come to our establishment, right? So
so you'd sign up with like so many companies. What's the company? Atari. The actual one that we all know. So Atari would be like, okay, we'll sign with like Acme Arcades, and they have like 1,000 locations in the US or whatever. And so just Acme Arcades have these. It wouldn't be like I'm signing with Joe's Tavern, because then it's like they get your one machine and you make $40 a day. It would.
They might. I would assume there might be some of those deals where it's like in our city, you're only allowed to sell this game to me or something like that.
Okay.
Like I could.
But
see
whatever
that
the
being a thing.
exclusivity looks like, that's what they were after. That makes sense.
And so now we can have this separate company. We'll just give them our designs, and this separate company will just copy us in slight modifications, and then they can make an exclusive deal, or they can make other deals.
Which everyone else, even if there was a third company which was unrelated, they'd probably be doing that anyway.
Yeah, so they hire Bushnell's neighbor, Joe Keenan, to manage this separate company, and this company does like really well, and including have you ever that tank game? You've probably played a variation of this where you have the tanks coming in from the opposite side, and you're trying to like blow each other up, right?
Oh yeah, I used to play this like at secondary school in lunch breaks and stuff.
The original, not only was Joe Keenan, did they copy everything Atari did and then, do these other contracts, but he actually hired someone, and then I think he took him from Atari and hired him, and then they came up with a new game, this tank game, and it was like wildly successful. And I think this was partially how they got discovered, because it blew up, and there was like, hey, wait a minute, what's this new company? Wait a minute, this is just Atari.
Hold on, but the guy who was running this company was just average Joe?
Joe Keenan, it was his neighbor. Apparently they were
just
friends.
Residential neighbor.
I'm sure he must have had some qualifications for Bushnell to hire him in the first place. But yeah,
that's great. It'd be like, hey, Joe.
Yeah, so this
isn't this illegal? This sounds really illegal somehow.
I don't think it would be, because it is they were completely separate companies just because they so happen to be owned by the same person. And, it's not like Atari's going to sue them for using their designs.
No, but I mean, like what was your competitions commission, the guy who sorts out monopolies and mergers?
Yeah, I don't know. I have someone with business law would have to ring in the forum, perhaps. On whether this would they got away with it either way. But yeah, once it did, after about a year, and I think it was the tank game that was just hugely popular. It was like, wait a minute. So then they got discovered, and then there was no point in keeping the two. But the great part about this is Joe Keenan did such a good job with his company, and Atari was having so many management problems that they made Joe Keenan the president of Atari.
The random neighbor dude?
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's like just being this dude's neighbor, running his random fake company, and then being paid president of Atari.
Yeah, so
there's a movie here. There's got to be a movie here.
Yeah, a great movie. There's so many great stories. I know on YouTube we've covered like a lot of the Microsoft shenanigans that are kind of similar to this, and Steve Jobs was like the king of this sort of thing.
We need Aaron Sorkin to write this movie. Yes, that's the guy who did The Social Network. This would be great.
Yeah, so you're looking at this, and I love this to sort of sum up this whole section. Alcorn, he's got this just the kind of the general attitude, a quote on kind of how these sorts of companies ran at the time and sort of their attitude of what they were doing. So yeah.
So Alcorn said, "You've got to see how far it goes before it blows up. We had no management experience, no business experience. We were just engineers picking it up as we went along. To me personally, coming out of Berkeley in the 1960s, I had no aspirations of being a capitalist pig or anything. This was just a fun thing to do." Wow.
Yeah, and they had, if you look into the history of Apple too, there was that third partner that no one ever talks about. And I can't even remember his name right now. And he had this same sort of thing where he was a little bit older. I think he was about 40 or something like that. And they were, Jobs and Wozniak were younger, and they had, they were just like, hey, let's just try this thing. And if it blows up in our face as well, who cares? We're young. We'll do something else. And for him, it was like, no, this is risky, guys. Too much. I'm going to step back. And then like shortly thereafter, Apple just takes off and just like, $1 billion company, all this. And yeah, he stepped out like just right before that happened. It was sort of this, it's being the young guy who can just, you do whatever, you don't care. If it doesn't work out, whatever.
You want to know the details we're missing? I just Googled it. His name is Ronald Wayne. I remember this from the Apple, from the Jobs book. He sold his share of the company back to Steve and Wozniak, Steve Jobs and Wozniak for, do you want to guess how much?
I'll say $350.
$350K?
$350.
Oh, no. Well, yeah, you're pretty close. It was $800, which is about $1,500 today. You want to know how much his estimated net worth would be if he hadn't done that today?
What?
This was back in 2010, so we can definitely add... That was post-iPhone, so we probably couldn't add as much as we think. But in 2010's Apple valuation would have put his share of the company. Do you want to take another guess?
I'll say $1.2 billion.
Nope, you are way off on this one.
Oh,
$22 billion.
Whoa.
Oh, Ronald.
That's got to sting a little bit.
Do you want to know what happened to him post-Apple or what happened to him today? This is just from Wikipedia, so I don't know how much we can rely on this, but it is interesting.
We have, if you want to navigate on over to today, I found out I have a whole thing on him somewhere.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is how I guessed like the 350, because I knew it wasn't much, but obviously I was wrong, because this was like a couple years ago when I was researching this, so yeah.
Wayne retired to a mobile home park in Nevada, selling stamps and rare coins. Wayne never owned an Apple product until 2011, when he was given an iPad 2 at an update conference in Brighton, England. Welcome to the interview section of the show. It's a real pleasure today. We've got quite an honor to have both Laurie and Corey Cole on the show. They're best known for the phenomenal Quest for Glory game series, which was kicked off with the groundbreaking Quest for Glory, So You Want to Be a Hero, back in 1989. Guys, welcome to the show. As I said, it's a real pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really nice to be able to speak about things and talk to people about what we've done in the past and what we're doing now.
Well, we appreciate it. David, I know you wanted to ask a question to kind of start off and kick things off in the introduction.
Yeah, so getting started, let's talk about Hero U Rogue to Redemption. Can you tell us a bit about the game and sort of like how you came up with the idea?
Well, we came up with the idea because we needed a job. Desperation is one of the best motivations for doing anything in the world.
You've no doubt heard about American health insurance, and it was breaking us. But it also really came down to we had been tossing the idea back and forth for a good 10 or 15 years. That Laurie ran a thing called the schoolforheroes.com online, and that we had a Quest for Glory-like thing of everybody can be a hero. People would do class assignments and so on. And that was actually really intended to be publicity for a novel that she was writing with someone else. And then we morphed that into saying, well, we ought to do another game, and this could be the publicity site for the game. All these things kind of percolated around. We did some prototypes and so on. But then 2012, Tim Schafer came onto the scene with Double Fine Adventure on Kickstarter. And of course, Tim had been making games all along with his company Double Fine. But, they wanted to go back to their roots and make a traditional graphic adventure. And we started getting dozens of calls and messages from fans that said, hey, look at what Tim Schafer is doing. You guys really should kickstart, a new Quest for Glory or some kind of another game. And we said, well, we don't own the rights to Quest for Glory, but we could do something new. And we've got this School for Heroes thing. And we said, why don't we call it Hero University or Hero U? And right about then, a fan down in Australia said, I'll help you make it. And we said, okay, all the pieces are in place. Let's do a Kickstarter.
Nice. Did you think about going back to Activision at all to get the rights?
We have talked to, the story is that when we did the Quest for Glory series for Sierra Online, they were what is known as work for hire, which means that, they paid us and they got all the rights to the series. So Sierra Online owned them, but Sierra Online kind of went away in a big scandal after they got acquired and became a company named Ascendant, and bounced around through 3 other companies, ended up currently under the umbrella of Activision. But there has not really been a Sierra for, about 15 years, just the name. So we've occasionally gone back to Activision and said, would you like to license us the rights to the Quest for Glory series so we can make a new game in it? And they've said, well, we don't know. We want to, it's valuable intellectual property that we have. Someday we may want to make use of that. And so we don't really want to license it out and possibly end up with a title that, isn't appropriate. And so we've tried that once or twice. We weren't offering him very much money, and that probably made them think we weren't serious. We didn't have much. And we've also talked with a couple of other companies that have gone to Activision and say, hey, we want to do a new Quest for Glory, or we want to remake the old ones. Let's talk about a license. And they basically just said, no, we're really not interested in licensing that. Mm-hmm. So it may still happen sometime in the future, but they haven't seen a compelling reason to have anyone else do a Quest for Glory.
Back to Hero, you were so when that game's coming out pretty soon, yeah?
Yeah, we're finally finishing it. I very naively, when we did the Kickstarter, we had the team in place and so on, I said, okay, we'll have this done in about a year. I was looking back to the very first games we did. When we did Quest for Glory was originally called Heroes Quest. We did the first Heroes Quest. We did that in, I guess, actually just over a year, but, 1 year of full production. I sort of forgot about the fact that, back then we were on, 16 color graphics and 320 by 200 resolution and a few other little things that simplified the game development process. Since then, between the first game and the fifth game in the Quest for Glory series, the budget went up 30-1. I kind of conveniently forgot all that and said, oh, we can do it like we used to.
Oh, that is, in fact, we were making a very different game when we started out. One of the things that game development is, it's a process. It's not a top-down, here's the rules, let's do it. It always has to adapt to what the situation is. And in the course of the Kickstarter, we actually changed the scope of the game from a simple roguelike game to an actual Quest for Glory style role-playing adventure game, because that's the feedback we were getting from the people that were supporting us.
Mm-hmm. So I've turned a simple question to a long-winded answer. The simple answer is yes. We are, after our 1-year project has turned into a 5-year project. We started this in November of 2012. We really got started January of 2013, and it is now March of 2018. And we're at long last the game is actually complete at this stage. You can play it from beginning to end. We've run it by 100 or so testers so far. We're about to open up the floodgates to another, technically 4,000. We'll probably get about 1,000 of them will actually play it. So we're about to go to 10 times the number of testers. And once it, makes it through that gauntlet, then we'll be ready to release it. So we're looking at probably a late April release.
Oh, wow.
I just put out an update to Kickstarter that's so close we can taste it.
Nice. So where can people go to buy it or pre-order it, I should say?
Well, there is a pre-order page on BackerKit. It's the site we're using, but you can actually get there by going to hero-u.com, hero-u.com. These days, we've learned better, never ever put punctuation in URL, but hero-u.com, and then there is a page for pre-orders. We're going to be raising the price fairly dramatically when it's actually released, so people who sneak in now will really be getting a bargain.
Oh, good.
I think this goes out about a month before then, so everyone listening, now's your chance.
Yeah.
You'd better hurry.
So I guess stepping back a little bit, we wanted to find out a little bit more about you guys. So how did you meet? Was it in gaming, or was you just before you got into computer gaming? Or
Well, before I got into computer gaming, I hadn't touched a computer before I met him.
Really?
Well, I mean, we had in the old days, we did have a pre-Game Boy handheld game machine that I had as a kid. And that's as close as I came to a computer.
Whereas I've been into computers since junior high or high school. And they were big, hulking mainframes, filled a half a room back then. But I got very lucky that my brother, when I was in high school, got involved with very early computer. This is okay. So talking around the story here. So fast forwarding that a few years and getting away from computers. We were both Dungeons and Dragons players during college. Lori was in Arizona. I was in California. And we played different variations of Dungeons and Dragons. And I had some friends when just after I got out of college, I was working in Chicago, which was pretty near where Dungeons and Dragons originated in Wisconsin. And I got into a D&D group there, and they encouraged me to run a game. So I wrote my own D&D scenario for it. Everybody loved it, so I went to a company called Judges Guild to to see if they wanted to publish it. And they eventually did. And I started giving demos of my game at science fiction conventions. And by a whole series of coincidences, Lori and I both ended up at a science fiction convention in San Francisco at the same time, even though neither of us lived anywhere near there. And I was demoing my game, and this cute girl walks into the room and starts looking around. And so I said, hey, there's room in my game if you'd like to play.
Yeah, he kind of dragged me into the game, and that's how I met him. Yeah.
Wow.
There you go.
So what were the early games for you that really got you into the computer gaming side of things? Like were any games that like inspired you or anything like that?
I'd say one of the most inspirational was Dungeon Master on the Atari ST. And before Sierra, I was working on a project, which actually is how I got into Sierra. For the Atari ST, I was developing a desktop publishing system because they really didn't even have a good word processor at the time. And a company down in San Diego came out with a game called Dungeon Master that was really groundbreaking in terms of a first-person dungeon exploration experience, and had kind of all the tropes we were used to from D&D on the computer.
In my case, the one that was the most inspirational to me was one of the Ultima games, which was the Avatar game.
Yeah, Ultima 4.
And they started out with this really creative, who is your character class type of thing, of what kind of character you are, from a fortune teller card game that you were developing your own character. And then you went into the game and you're this little digital character that basically runs around the screen doing jumping jacks, and you had very little interaction. And the beginning of the game was such a promise of real role-playing, of an experience that, you could really get into the game. And it wound up just being another little hack and slash go around the world. And to me, it didn't live up to its promise. Most of the games didn't live up to actually telling a story. And that's what I really wanted from a game.
And on the other side, I had played some of the text adventure games, pre-Infocom, in fact. I played Colossal Cave Adventure and the original mainframe version of Zork. And so I'd kind of gotten into that. We looked at all these games and said there's something missing. So the text adventures tell a story, sort of, but you don't really get immersed in it. You don't have the graphics or the I am there. You don't really feel like you are the character in the story. And the role-playing games immersed you a little more, but they really lacked in the story element. So Dungeon Master had story elements in the little book that came with it, but the game itself was, a hack and slash, an exploration game. So we said, why can't we put all this together? And of course, part of the answer was the fact that, Apple II at that point had 48K of memory, bytes, not gigabytes, but, 1,000 bytes of memory. It's, so there wasn't much space to play around with. But, we just felt that, every time we played a game, we said, our experience from live D&D, we know this can be done better.
How long did it take for that to catch up? For the technology to really be enough for you to implement your vision of what you had back then?
Well, it should be there in about 20 years or so from now.
Actually, Quest for Glory, when it came out, it did everything we wanted it to do. It told a good story. It had action, because that's the thing a game really needs to do, is not just get you on an intellectual level, which is what an adventure game does. It's all puzzle solving and that, but get you on an emotional and experiential level of having something that's your virtual life is on the line. That kind of intensity that brings just involves you even further into the game and into the story.
So once again, to stop talking around your question, 10 years. 1979 was about when I first encountered these text adventure games, and the mid to late 80s, we came across Ultimate Dungeon Master. So 10 years from adventure games, 5 years from role-playing games, and we came in at what we think of as the perfect time. So 1988, I started at Sierra, and at that point were just starting to improve the quality of the graphics and do these graphic adventures that really let you see the story going on as well as read about it. And they had enough power for us to do what we wanted to do, of bringing together adventure games and role-playing games to a degree.
So speaking of Sierra, like, what was it? I mean, Sierra was an iconic, game maker for a couple decades there. So what was it like working with Sierra at the beginning, like in the early days there?
Well, when I came on, I was a contractor, and I had never done games before. I was a teacher, but I had never worked with a lot of people before. They basically said, okay, you're the designer, you're in charge, here's your group.
And I nearly got fired before any of that happened.
Really?
Yeah, because they brought me on to convert all of their games from the MS-DOS, we didn't even have Windows back then, to the Atari ST. And the only problem is they didn't actually have an Atari ST available for me to work on. In fact, it took about 2 weeks before I even had a computer, even a PC to work on. I did a lot of wandering and talking with my manager, about some of the issues of it, reading code and so on, whereas, the top executive staff had no idea what I was doing or why this guy was wandering around instead of sitting at his desk pumping out code.
Yeah.
Said, well, it's kind of hard to pump out code when you don't have a computer. I actually wrote that interpreter on, I think, 10, maybe 20 yellow legal pads. So it's all handwritten. And then I entered it all into the computer because I just didn't have the tools to actually do editing on the computer initially. But once we got in there, they basically threw us in there and said, make a game. And fortunately, they also assigned us Bob Fishbach, who was a very experienced programmer who had worked on King's Quest or Police Quest and some other Sierra games. Mm-hmm. We had mostly the most junior artists, but we had a couple of artists that had worked on other games. So we had some people that we could actually ask questions of. Indirectly, it turned out that doing the system code of the interpreters helped because I actually knew the SCI language really well before I started to code anything in it because I had just converted it from one machine to another.
The other thing is that, like I said, game development is a process, and what we started out with, what we wanted to do for Quest for Glory, actually changed as it went along, adapting to the people we had on it. And because of the people that worked on our team, it had a more cartoony feel to it. It wasn't quite the grand, dramatic adventure that we started out thinking it was. And we also had humor brought into the game. Also, not just because we had a cartoony kind of character look, we also had very creative programmers that were willing to add really great humor to it, and as well as some of the artists. So the system and the story developed and the art style developed because of who we had on the team.
Yeah, so our early influences at Sierra were the two Bobs. Bob Heitman was in charge of programming, and Bob Fishbach was on our team. And Bob Fishbach prototyped the first few what they called rooms, but scenes of the Game for Heroes Quest. He was basically just sitting there and saying, okay, we've got these, this picture that the one of the artists created for you, but we need interactivity. So he said, okay, look at tree. And he may put in some sort of flippant message with a pun, figuring we'd correct it later. And what he didn't know is that I've long been known as an incorrigible punster.
Yeah.
I have a button that says, incorrigible punster, do not encourage. So I said, oh, this is cool. This is fun. So we went with that style, doing the funny messages for things. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, I mentioned we had some beginning artists. One of the artists Lori had done the initial drawings for the game in crayon, or
it was colored pencil.
Pastel pencils.
Okay, fine.
And they're pretty simple. And the artist took these very literally, and he put it into the game looking exactly like a crayon drawing. And we were kind of appalled because, we had this high fantasy of Imagine and these beautiful scenes, and we got, something that was, a colored pencil drawing. So we said, if everything's going to look cartoony, we can't have a serious game. It would spoil the mood of graphics that don't go with it. So that's actually the team shifted the whole mood of the game, and we said, okay, fine, we'll go with that. That's fun.
However, we did keep with a very serious story.
You're so serious.
Yeah. We did want a grand adventure, and we did have that. Despite the fun and the humor, it had very serious situations that you were put up in the game, and you had to take creative approaches to how to solve problems. Adventure games tend to be one problem, one solution, solve it. And if you can't solve it, you can't think what that one solution is, you're hitting your head against the game, and it becomes frustrating and not much fun. Mm-hmm. Whereas our game, we wanted to have problems that we presented to the player, but they had to use creative solutions, and it didn't just take one possible solution to every problem. You could find a different approach to every problem so that you didn't get that frustrating hit your head against the wall kind of experience.
Mm-hmm. And part of it is also that we wanted to have the differentiation between the character classes, the fighter, the magic user, or the thief, and each one had different skills. So we set up, as Lori said, problems rather than puzzles that you needed to solve, and we gave you a skill set, and there were various items lying around in the game. And the idea was that as much as we could manage it, that you could use anything you could find or any skill you had to try to solve a problem. And in practice, we had to, actually program in most of this, but we managed to give it a pretty free-form feel that you could wander around this world, talk to people, do things. If it got to night and the gates of the town were closed and you had climbing skill, you could climb over the wall. If you had the levitate spell, you could levitate yourself up and across the wall that way, so that you weren't constrained just by the strict rules of a adventure game that says you must find the red egg because the blue egg will not work. So how did it much more general and freeform than that?
So how did you manage the complexity without presumably added a ton of complexity when you had limited storage and everything? How did that all shake out?
Well, because I'm crazy. It's clear because I can't do something simple. I just have, too many thoughts about how you could do something. I always thought from the player point of view. What do they want to do? How do they want to solve this problem? And so, therefore, it becomes very complex. And there's a lot of writing involved and a lot of complex programming that wasn't, Sierra wasn't used to doing.
So we're not actually quite sure how we managed to get that game done. And it has a little to do with Hero U taking 5 years instead of 1. We had just a ton of ideas. I actually recently did an interview for a documentary, and the interviewer had previously talked to Ken Williams, and Ken said, these guys were crazy. They wanted to do stuff that we couldn't possibly do, in a game. It would never be finished, but I let them go ahead and try it, and figured they'd fail, and somehow they managed to get it done.
Yes, and part of that is, we don't have time now. We're running out of time. Throw this away. We had to throw away areas of the game. We had to throw away a concept that we were going to have happen in the game because we had this tight deadline. And so that kept us going and focusing on what we could accomplish and how to make that better.
Yeah, we've sometimes talked about the relationship between a game director and a producer. And so Lori was in the position of being the game designer, but also the director in charge of direct management of the team and so on. And then we had a producer, Garuka Singh Khalsa, who was responsible for dealing with management, getting us resources, making sure we had publicity and so on. And what we've often said is that the director should be completely unconstrained and should, want the sky's the limit and have every, amazing blue sky idea there is. And the producer should be the person to say, hey, we need to get this done on time and within budget. And so those are really great ideas. Let's talk about which ones that we're actually going to put in the game. So I don't know how much our producer actually did on that, but certainly some. But, in practice, we had, the original game, you were going to be able to play male or female. You could play a centaur or an elf or was it a giant or a gnome?
No.
Or a gnome or a human. And we got quickly disabused of that. We were on floppy disks at the time. We weren't even using CD-ROM. There was no memory to do this.
I remember switching disks. You go from one scene to the other, and then you swap. It says, please insert this too.
Yes. So, yes, reality made us design the game the way it was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So around the same time as we did Heroes Quest, Quest for Glory 1, Al Lowe was working on Leisure Suit Larry 2, and he made the game completely linear, that you had different locations you went to, and there was some inciting incident like getting on a cruise ship or something like that would take you from one location to another. You never went back. And that way he could swap disks in between. We had a much more open-ended world and it was, rarely clear when the disk swap should happen.
So it took a lot of creativity to try to get that game to
and probably kind of a pain to the players.
But I think that sort of complexity and the fact that you could just go around anywhere, just explore was also, it was such a great strength for the game over anything else, at the time.
Yeah, we wanted to have a living, breathing town and valley. We wanted to make it feel like you were actually in a place rather than just being dumped down and given some puzzles to solve.
Likewise, we wanted the player to feel like he was there, that it was his world, his adventures that he was doing. And we let the main character of the game has no name, has no lines in the game, and it's solely the player that gives him his personality or gives him what he is saying in his own mind, so that the player is directly a part of the game itself.
Do you feel, I'm wondering, like in the development of the game over the last few years, do you feel like a lot of these constraints, obviously, swapping out discs and stuff, that's gone, but do you feel there are new constraints that have come in developing a game now compared to the past, or do you feel completely unconstrained, there's just so much to be done?
Yeah, so well, first of all, you can't ever finish a project without constraints.
Yes.
We were asked in one of our projects on Shannara, we said, if you had an unlimited budget and unlimited time, what would you do with it? And we sort of sat there and looked dumb. We came up with a couple ideas, but without the constraints, it's really hard to, because if you say write a story, well, what's the story about? Where's it set? What's going on? What's the medium? How are you presenting this story? All these things matter. The fact that we're making interactive games in a computer has totally different requirements than if we were writing a short story on paper.
Yeah, so there are always constraints. The team that you have is a great constraint. We had different artists and different programmers all along, and each gave their own different strength into it. But people, we didn't have much money. That was major constraint here is how much money did we have to spend for this? And so there we were. We had people go off and find other jobs and that along the way, and we brought in other people. So we constantly had to adapt to the situation as it was.
Yeah, so you have relatively unlimited memory, both for disk space and for the game itself. Your graphics are much fancier. But along with that, you bring in additional costs. And these costs actually do matter. That, first of all, there's a question of making the game run fast enough on a low-end machine. So if you really go hog wild with the animation and real-time stuff going on, some players may not be able to play the game. So we still have constraints, but they're more subtle because we know we can make the game look extremely beautiful and sound wonderful, and we want to do that. But who was it? Brian Moriarty went from Infocom over to Lucas. He did the game Loom after doing several Infocom adventures. And he wrote an article in which he said that his major learning thing on doing graphic adventure games is that rule number one of a graphic adventure game is anything that you want to do in the story, you must show. You can't just talk about it, you have to show it. And rule number two is that you never have the resources to show anything. So it's always this play between we're envisioning, when we look at the castle in Hero U or the town of Caligari where it's set, we're imagining, walking through the streets of Barcelona and that you've got these amazing medieval alleyways and architecture, and you've got people all around you and noises and smells and all this stuff going on. But you can only get a subset of that on the screen. We don't have the budget to hire 1,000 extras, and we certainly couldn't, have each one of them having a conversation as they walk through the street and have it be realistic. So, we have to stay to the story we're doing and, in a subset of it. But we're trying to impart some of that feeling of what we see in our heads is this huge, rich, vibrant environment.
And we try to make that as much as we can, given the fact we don't have time, money, or the resources to do it.
So what we did is we took upon ourselves the time. So I originally said, we're going to try and have this game out in a year.
Yeah.
And we couldn't. Even if we had stayed with our original simplified plans, it would have taken at least 2 years.
Yes, we had people come and go and people come and go and had problems of how to get this thing to work because we were spoiled by Sierra. They had a nice structured system that we worked with to create our game. And we didn't have that for this. We had to figure out what we're going to work with and how it works before we could even do anything to make it work.
So
yeah, I mean, when you have programmers from anywhere in the world, how do you find them?
Yeah. So you're talking about like how many programmers, how many people does it take to make a game like this, and how many people are typically involved in something like this?
It's about 100. We actually had 30, but I think 30 to 32, somewhere in there, is the total number of people who've worked in the team.
At any given time, we've usually had around
about 10. We've had about 10 working on it any given moment in time. That's about what we have currently. But we have like 8 active people and 2 people that do specific things for us.
And or then half of those have full-time jobs. So therefore, we are working in the in-betweens. Yes, most of our people have given us some amount of their time, and we use that time as fullest we could.
Yeah, one of our wonderful and creative programmers who we have on now has a full-time job for another game company and just had a baby.
Wow.
No pressure.
Somewhere in there, he managed to find a few hours every week to work in our game. And we're so grateful because he's made amazing contributions. I don't think we can even mention his name, but, just our team is wonderful. We have really dedicated people.
And they're all around the world. I mean, at one point, we had more people working in Australia and New Zealand than we had in the United States. So it was a very interesting, unique experience because of the people that we've worked with on this team, we've only actually met a couple of them. All of them were found virtually off the internet and off the world of, virtuality.
Yeah, one of our current team actually worked at Sierra, but he was mostly in the Seattle office. So I don't know, did we ever meet Al in person?
We never met Al in person.
Okay, so the current team we have, we've never met any of them in person.
You mentioned.
So how do you? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to ask. You mentioned right back at the beginning when you were considering doing the Kickstarter. Someone was it in Australia? Like a fan said, "I will help you do this." Are these people who are working with you now fans of the game, or are these people you've kind of recruited later on of the original game? Sorry, to kind of work with you today.
Yeah, they are Quest for Glory fans. What actually happened is
some of them.
I think all of them. Okay, well, some of them we got because we have a super fan on Cyprus who calls herself Elsa after one of the characters in the game. And she runs a site called questformoreglory.com, that talks about the Quest for Glory games. When we mentioned in one of the Kickstarter updates that we needed more developers, she listed that on her site and got some of the developers, some of the people who came to her site, came to us and said, and sent us their information and said, yeah, I'd like to work in your game. I was a big Quest for Glory fan, and I'd love to work on this. And we ended up hiring several of them on a contract basis. Some of them are still with us today.
This seems like a bit of you have the game sort of morphing, evolving over time, and then you have people coming and going. That seems like a nightmare to manage.
It is a nightmare to manage. It really doesn't get managed. It sort of flows, You take it as every day as it comes, and you work with the people and the hours they're giving you, because any given person has their own life somewhere else, and they're not in a little cubicle like in the old days of stuck between 9 to 5 doing work. So they give us work as they get it done, and that's why we're kind of fuzzy on deadlines.
And fortunately, I'm probably a really terrible manager, and therefore nightmare management situation doesn't faze me too much. I'm very laissez-faire. I give people general direction, and we meet with them every week on Google Hangouts, and then they go off in their own way.
Yeah, so we're really probably very frustrating to work for, too, because we require everybody be creative and have to figure out things that, they think that we should be telling them.
Or the opposite. Yeah. Maybe they're not frustrated. Maybe they are creatively empowered, is the way we like to
But they have to have the personality to be adaptive, to, and to figure out how to handle something when nobody's going to tell you exactly what to do.
Besides us, I believe we have exactly one team member who has been here from the beginning of the project, which is John Paul Selwood, is our lead artist, and he is a miracle worker. But at the same time, we've paid him not well, but better than a warehouse job. So he's actually getting to do art and be paid for it. He was a fan artist before that, while working full time as a cafeteria worker. His art has just dramatically improved by leaps and bounds over the 5-year period of the game, and he gets to have creative freedom and do some really fun stuff. And meanwhile, we get our ideas amplified because we'll give him a sketch or an idea of what we want, and he'll come back with something 10 times better. So, and that's kind of how the whole team is. But I just single out JP because he's been here from the beginning, and we wouldn't have a game without him. Every game, you read these postmortems and games and so on, and they talk about the plan they came in with and so on. What they rarely mention is that this entire process of making a game has an enormous amount of luck involved. And the luck is who you get, whether you're able to find financing when you need it, whether you have the resources, whether the initial design actually makes any sense when you start implementing it. We've had to throw out dozens of ideas in this game. We had a whole lock-picking mechanism that we said, this is boring. Players are going to be picking locks all through the game. We finally ended up going more like Quest for Glory and saying, okay, what's your lock-picking skill? Did you make it or not? We ended up morphing our original thought of a lock-picking puzzle into a trap disarming puzzle because there are fewer traps. So we could do something more complicated. And that went through, we probably spent 6 months going back and forth on ideas for that. Then then JP got involved, and a programmer got involved, and another programmer got involved, and we ended up with something absolutely wonderful that we love. But it doesn't look too much like what we started.
So from a lower level, so you have all this management of people and stuff. What about, I think a lot of people don't know, like, what does a gaming engine, how does that work into this process on the low level of actually making the game?
It definitely affected how we did things in this game because we didn't know what we were doing at the beginning. We started out because we were told Unity was the way to go. So therefore, we didn't know anything about Unity, but we were told that's right. So therefore, we had to see how to make it work. And we discovered that it doesn't work the way we think it will.
Yeah, Unity is free, and it's a really powerful engine that does both 2D and 3D, and it's got great stuff. Well, what we discovered is, yes, if you have a tool that does everything, it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier of having a game without constraints. Unity can do everything, but to make it do something, you need to basically get a bunch of add-ons and write in-between code that does it. So Unity is really great for doing certain types of action games and so on. But an adventure game has certain constraints. We have the idea of scenes that you're going to.
And we were starting out thinking of this as a Sierra game because that's the style we were looking at. And so therefore it was going to be a 2D game that looks 3D, which is what Sierra did.
And what we discovered is that Unity is really, really good at 3D. And at least back in version 4, where we were when we started this project, it didn't do 2D very well. We had to basically map all of our 2D images onto 3D objects in order to display them.
And animation, well, we didn't have a good program to animate them. So our characters were at first looking like paper dolls, cutouts that actually were moved like puppets. And they didn't look very good.
Yeah, so we might have been able to do South Park type animation,
Yes.
but it just, the game didn't look good to start with. So we went through a lot of phases in that. We also found that when we started looking for traditional 2D paper animators, that we had a terrible time finding them, that everybody had moved to 3D. There really were not very many people that, and there were people that did, retro, like the old, 16-color blocky pixel animation stuff. And, we had a couple of them apply, and we said, that's not the look we're looking for. We want a more realistic look. We want this to really look beautiful. We had trouble finding people. So over time, the game gradually more and more morphed from a 2D game to a 3D game. And we had very bad memories of Quest for Glory 5 at Sierra, which was the only Quest for Glory done in 3D that it's a pretty terrible looking game. And, we were ahead of the curve there.
But it does not age well.
It does not age well. And it was, massively blew out the budget. Okay, so all of our games were done for, a few $100,000 for the early games, under $1 million for Quest for Glory 4, and almost $5 million for Quest for Glory 5.
Wow.
That's a jump.
Yes, and we had a $300-something thousand budget from our Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
So we were looking, retro. We were looking, let's do something like Quest for Glory 1 or 2.
But in the course of it, we morphed to Quest for Glory 5.
Or really 4. The beauty of 4 with the freedom of environment of 5. So that we have, that really huge environment. So when we talked about a room in an early Sierra game, it was a picture.
It was a
snapshot.
proscenium stage, and it was set up like a stage.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in here we have a room called the Great Hall, and it is a huge long hallway with stairs going up to a mezzanine, and it can take the player can take 30 seconds or a minute walking across this one room. So the entire game just feels huge compared to what we were able to do with Quest for Glory 4. It's really open-ended, and of course that means we had to have interaction with every object in that game. And it is really a massive undertaking, much bigger than we set out to do.
And it's got a huge script because really the thing is we've always wanted the games to feel like a real world. And so therefore you have characters that move in this world and you talk to them in different places and they don't say the same thing in every place. So it's got a script the size of the last Harry Potter book. I mean...
And we burned out a few of our developers along the way, so that's one of the reasons they've had turnover. And others, of course, just we're paying them X number of dollars an hour, and they some of them were just able to springboard off that to get a job for Electronic Arts or a big industrial company and so on, and get much higher salaries.
Real pay.
Yeah, and we got you into the game industry. We're very happy for you. We then go out and look for some more people.
We wanted to ask, over the course of the last few years, you've obviously got a lot of experience like hiring developers and different people. What advice would you have for people who are looking into game development? Is there any sort of educational background you were looking for, you'd recommend people get in order to make them, appeal to you as people who are hiring this sort of person?
Well, it's really tough. Our general advice for people wanting to break into the game industry is, well, don't.
Next question.
How did I become a programmer at Sierra? I became a programmer at Sierra by doing 10 years of programming work for non-gaming companies. So I was a very experienced senior software developer before coming into gaming at all. Specifically, it's a really good idea to at least get a bachelor's degree in a specific field. If you're going to be a programmer / developer, then get a degree in computer science. If you're going to do art and animation, there's probably more work for you. And, getting an art degree is a really good idea. Specifically today, you definitely want to learn Unity. It's being used by a lot of houses. It really is a very powerful system. And as an artist, you need to know some 3D tools, maybe Maya, maybe, I don't know what they use these days.
Well, in my case,
3D Studio.
The reason I got into computer gaming is because I had a husband who wanted to get into computer gaming. So therefore, it takes luck. It takes people because that's always the way to get a job, is to know somebody else and to make friends and to go to conventions and to interact with people and learn where they are and what they're doing. And through context, you get jobs. We got the job at Sierra because we had met somebody at a science fiction convention who worked for Sierra. And that happens all the time. We got JP because we were working with somebody else. And all of these people have connections. So the one way to get a real good job is to make connections with other people and to interact and to be passionate about what you're doing such that you can show that passion to other people and they recognize it.
Which is funny because we think of ourselves as shy introverts, don't get out and do a lot with other people, but you have to break out of that. So we met at a science fiction convention, somebody else that we played Dungeons & Dragons with, and knew that we were, that we ran a D&D game and we had developed our own game system. Carly Huck's daughter happened to live part-time in the Bay Area and part-time in Coarse Gold, California, where she did contract work for Sierra. So she did the animation for King's Quest IV Perils of Rosella. And she was in on a meeting with Ken Williams where they said, we want to get back into role-playing games. We need to find some expert, dungeon masters to make us a great role-playing game. And Carly said, "Oh yeah, I know a couple people that are really good at that." She talked to us, and then it became a risk-taking thing. As we had to drop everything we were doing in our home in San Jose. We had to sell the house. We had to quit the project, the desktop publishing project I was working on, and pull up all our roots, move up into the mountains, and work for Sierra. Today, you don't have to do that as much. I mean, all of our people are working at home, and there are lots of opportunities for that. But you need to be willing to take risks. You need to maybe be willing to work for a lot less pay than you would at an industrial job, and you need to make friends and go places. Go to the Game Developers Conference, which is really expensive. We hardly ever go because it's too expensive for us. But go to science fiction conventions, talk, meet people. If someone is on a panel that says things you like. I got it. One of the things I did when I wanted to get into programming originally, I subscribed to the Electronic Engineering Times, and I read a wonderful editorial by this young man named Bill Gates, who was running a small startup company called Microsoft at the time, and talked about the future of the computer industry. And I said, this is right on. This guy's really got it. And I wrote him a letter and said, that was a really great article. And oh, by the way, here's my resume. I'd love to come work for you. A week or two later, I got a call from Microsoft wanting me to go up there and interview. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I went a different path. But, having the chutzpah he wasn't the Bill Gates back then, but he was still running an important company. And having the chutzpah to go and say, I'd like to go to work for you was the only way to get that opportunity, because I didn't know anyone personally who worked there. But you've got to go and put yourself out there and, be willing to do whatever it takes to get the job you want. And you've also got to develop some skills that are applicable. So, in this last pass over the last 2 or 3 years in this project, as we brought in new developers, I didn't take anyone who didn't know Unity. We've, I guess, one programmer who's a volunteer who didn't at first know Unity, but everyone else, had significant Unity development experience before we brought them on. And, we don't have the bandwidth to be able to train people on the job. So you have to have those skills.
But you can get those skills by learning online. You don't have to have a class or, you don't have to have formal training. Yeah. And we didn't care if you had formal training. We just cared if you had the skills themselves.
Yeah, Unity is free. There's all kinds of free tutorials online. Go and make yourself a subset of the game.
Likewise for artists. I mean, you've got to learn the tools like Photoshop and things and Maya, all those complex things. But the fun thing is most of us are self-taught with things like Photoshop. You can have great skills, but you learn it because you go in and you find the classes or you find the tutorials online.
In her alternate life, Lori is an artist and a photographer. And, we had heard a lot about Photoshop, but hadn't really done anything with it. And then actually, I guess Terry Robinson got you into it.
Well, that was ages ago.
Ages ago.
Starting, yes.
So Lori finally decided to try Photoshop and, did a little bit of drawing with it and so on. And then, started learning more and more, just spending hundreds of hours watching tutorials and doing experiments with it until she could really make it sing. And, now she does, some, wonderful photography that is all photo manipulated not to make it into something different, but just to improve it. And, having those fundamental skills you can develop on your own. Didn't cost her a whole lot, let's count cameras. And, once you learn it, got it. That means that now she can meet with an artist and say, okay, why don't you use, the blur tool or something like that? Here's a technique you can use to separate your layers and, and give more depth to this painting. You have to be able to communicate.
Really amazing, the tools and the information on how to use them that we just have at our fingertips these days. Just how you can get Photoshop, just a program that's insanely so many layers to it.
Yeah, and that's a life lesson, Always learn. Always be willing to learn. Always be willing to adapt to situations. And take the tools that you have and make them work for you.
And, we talked about adapting to the team. That applies too, is that you don't necessarily end up doing what you started out to do. With Hero U, we originally visualized as kind of a top-down roguelike. You might think of a chessboard with chess pieces for the player and the monsters and so on. And, that was the environment we had at the time. Partially, it was the fans saying, we really want something that looks like a Quest for Glory. But it was also that, when we started working with John Paul, he has wonderful illustration skills. And he was able to paint backgrounds that brought scenes to life. And we said, okay, well, let's switch over to the proscenium stage idea and go to the Sierra look of, and basically we went through these various stages with the talent we had and the people we had and started to refine the look of the game. At some point we said, okay, well, little characters walking around the screen gets boring after a while. And, how do we illustrate? We're not making a movie here. We don't have a $100 million budget or $10 million budget even. And so he said, how can we really show an action sequence? And the answer was to illustrate it with a vignette. So it's like in a storybook where you turn the page in the storybook and you have a full page painting of the action of the scene. And we started putting those in and said, hey, these actually work. We don't have to animate everything because we know we can't, if instead we can show a still frame that really tells the story. And then just recently, we've started taking some of those still frames and saying, well, actually, we can make a short movie just by moving the camera around in that frame. And we're getting some pretty interesting looks there. So you discover as you go. And the same thing applies if you're doing a project on your own. Play with it. Don't just copy what someone else has done. Say, okay, what can I do to make this more exciting and more fun?
And what do I like? What is it that makes me excited, and what do I want to do with it?
So moving on to Kickstarter, that's like a whole process too. I imagine what was the process like there? I mean, starting, I imagine that was just a ton of work.
Well, first of all, I don't know if it's the same now as it was then. 2012 was Kickstarter had been around for a few years in 2012, but that was kind of the breakout year with Double Fine Adventure and the Torment, Tides of Numenera, and several other really big ticket games. And of course, ours was relatively big ticket at the time. But you don't go on to Kickstarter and say, I've got this game idea, especially today, and say, I've got this game idea, give me money for it. It doesn't happen. What you do is you prepare for months in advance. And I think probably, we were naive about it. I think Double Fine probably did a huge preparation process before they did their Kickstarter, and we maybe did a little bit less. But you're going to be making a lot of concept art. You want to have your design pretty solid. Ideally today, I think you need to actually fund it yourself and get a prototype up and running so that people can actually see at least a movie of it, if not actually a playable version. I don't know how many people actually play the playable versions of prototypes that they put up there, but they will watch that 1 or 2 minute or 3 minute movie that talks about what it is you're doing. And that had better be really good looking. You'd better have really good illustrations for it.
We started in the days of the amateurs. So ours looked really kind of amateurish when we started out because that's what everybody on Kickstarter looked like. But then we did another Kickstarter, what was it? In
2015, 3 years later.
3 years later, and the market had totally changed. Everything was slick, programmed. It all looked very professional. It couldn't look amateurish at that point. And basically, our Kickstarters were always driven by the fans that we had prior. I mean, we got very few people that suddenly saw our stuff and said, wow, I really like that. Most of them were people that knew what we had done in the past, and they knew that we were going to do something great this time.
Yeah, so by 2015, we had games like Ukulele, I think it was called, and the vampire game that that just came right out and said, Kickstarter is not going to give us our entire budget for the game. It's basically a down payment that we're going to use to convince investors to put money into the game. Our real budget is going to be 10 times the Kickstarter budget.
Kickstart my Kickstarter project.
Yes, it's kickstarting our project. That's what it is now. It doesn't fund your project, it gets it started.
Which makes sense. I mean, the name Kickstarter.
Yeah.
But back in 2012, Tim Schafer felt that it was kind of a badge of honor. They had to make the game for the amount of money they got in Kickstarter. That was the budget. And in practice, they couldn't do that. They got $3.5 million, and it wasn't enough to make their Double Fine venture that they ended up with. So, but back in 2012, anyway, you're asking the process of Kickstarter. Besides the preparation, you want to have a lot of notes together of what you're going to say in updates. So essentially, if you're running a 30-day Kickstarter, ideally, you should be posting an update every 1 to 2 days that has something new about the game, something about the rewards, something about the story, something about where you're going, how the Kickstarter is progressing. A lot of that has to be written on the fly because it's current news, but some of it can be prepared in advance. But you have to feed that audience. You have to continually give them something to read and something new.
And be responsive, because you'll get a lot of comments, and you have to be constantly generating the answers to these things. You're trying to build energy. You're trying to build excitement, because what you have here is a 3-ring circus going to that final day. And you want those people that you caught with your videos to get excited, to get involved, and to keep putting more money into your project, because that's how you get a Kickstarter to be funded.
You also need a fandom. Okay, so you cannot put a project up on Kickstarter and say, I have the greatest game idea in the world, back me. And you'll get a few backers, will mysteriously discover it, but really you've got to have your fandom in place before you start. We had a mailing list from our School for Heroes of people that had gone to our free website. And so we had a couple thousand people that we could notify about this. And it was a few years out of date. A lot of those emails were invalid, but we at least, got the message out to some people. We got a list of email addresses of gaming publications people that had written about previous Kickstarters. And I sent every one of them a short individualized note that says, hey, we created these games called Quest for Glory back in the 90s, and we're getting back into making a new game, and we'd love to give an exclusive interview.
Yeah, Kickstarter is a huge project all on its own, and it requires an incredible amount of energy, time, and devotion strictly to Kickstarter, and you're not going to be able to do anything else if you want to make it work.
Fortunately, making a game is also an incredible work that that takes 60-hour weeks for years, and that if you don't have the energy to do a Kickstarter, you probably don't have the energy to make a game either.
And you had some experience.
Don't let anyone tell you that making a game is like playing one. Not the same at all.
So I wanted to ask John Rhys Davies in Quest for Glory 4. One, he had a lot to say, and the script for him was huge, and you had him saying some really hilarious things sometimes for such a refined speaker and stuff. What was the process like of just talking to him or getting him to work on the project?
Well, he was amazing. The way we got him to work on the project is the same way we got all the actors for Quest for Glory 4. Is we had a Hollywood voice director named Stu Rosen, very talented guy. He actually has some bit parts in there, so you can hear his voice in the game. Stu, basically hired some studio time and got a whole lot of Hollywood voice actors to come in and record lines. We gave them Laurie broke down pieces of the script and came up with sample dialogue for each of the characters. And they came in and read the lines, and then they sent us a whole bunch of digital audio tapes. We listened to and said, this is the one we like best.
But of course, when they said, we could get you John Rhys Davies,
it was like, okay.
Yep. We don't need to listen to anything. We know what he sounds like. He's perfect.
And then what you do is you schedule a studio session time with each person. A Hollywood union actor basically can't work more than 4 hours. 1 4-hour session in a day, except we sometimes broke that a little. And you basically hire another secretary effectively to go through and manage the schedules of all these actors and our schedule, arrange studio time. And then I went down there with with a laptop computer that I bought for the purpose and some software that was developed at Sierra to let us do the voice recording and edit it later. We went through the script with each of the actors, handed them script. Stu was there for all the sessions, and he did things like brought donuts. And one of the actresses showed up and said, "Oh no, I forgot my glasses." And he brought out his selection of about a dozen readers of different magnifications and said, which level do you like? And she found a reader that she could use. So just totally prepared for that. He'd done it before and knew all the problems that were going to come up. Mm-hmm. We went through, and then initially we did it with most of the actors. We did it by, I'd give them a cue, and they would read the line, and then we'd decide, okay, if we want to retake, we'd say, okay, take two, and give another cue, and go on. Very, very laborious process. We did this with John Rhys Davies for a while, and then he looked at the size of the remaining script and said, hey, I'm supposed to go out. I've got a vacation on Catalina scheduled, or wherever it was, and I'm not going to skip that for this, but you've got me scheduled for 3 days of studio time. This is going to take at least a week. So first of all, he started double shifting. The other thing he said is, forget these cues, they're taking too long. And he just started going down the page and reading line after line after line. And then I made a couple of notation marks for ones that needed retakes. And then we did the half dozen or so retakes, because he did like 1,000 lines on a sequence, scarcely pausing for breath. And then, of course, the people back at Sierra had a nightmare breaking that apart into to fit the actual lines, but managed it. It took a month or two of post-processing to get it to work. But, John was just a trooper. Just went through and did all the lines. And, he's got this, he's really a very humorous guy. And he gets this kind of sly expression. He'll read these funny lines with totally straight, but you can hear that little bit of humor behind it as he's reading it.
But yeah, I saw the Rusalka line where you have him doing the thief sign to the Rusalka, the patting the head, and he reads it in this sultry voice type thing. It's hilarious.
Yes. So he had a great time doing it, although afterwards he called it the CD-ROM from hell, just because when you're doing Saturday morning cartoon voice recording, what is considered a line there is, hey, look over there. And what we consider a line is, well, back in the days of yore, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So it's basically a paragraph of text in one line. It was just way more, his agent ended up renegotiating a higher price, which we happily paid once we got Sierra management to agree to it. And we got him a large bottle of, some vintage champagne or something as a gift afterwards. Just all traditions in there. But, all the voice act, we had, was it Joanne Gerber, or is that...
we had some great voices,
and some of these people, Cam Clark, are actually very famous for their cartoon work and so on. And we're just really blessed to get amazingly talented actors. And I mostly put them down to Stu, who knows how to schmooze.
Yeah. And it's wonderful working with voice actors, and you give them, with my games, my scripts, my characters are so varied. They're not just straightforward characters. I've got people that have pirate accents, or they have East Indian accents, and to have these people come in cold, these actors come in cold and start reading these lines, and suddenly they're in character, and you hear those lines come to life. That's like magic.
Yeah.
It's a high point in game design to get to do that, and we're not doing that for Hero U, because this one has a script that's too long.
Yeah.
If John Rhys Davies had a problem with our previous script, he would have a problem with this one.
It's the blue ray from hell.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was a decision we made early on because my son was also heavily involved in this. He's a gamer, and he encouraged us to do things. He's also works in marketing, so he got us a lot of the publicity contacts. But he said basically that a lot of these smaller indie games have just really terrible voice acting, and it ruins the game. Mm-hmm. So he says bad voice acting will destroy a good game, and you can't really afford great voice acting. So don't do it. We had to kind of stick to our guns on that this entire time. That's the one thing we did not change, is we said that, this is going to be a text-only game, because if we're going to deal with voice acting, we want to get people like Cam Clark and John Rhys Davies. We don't want to, we've had I've had dozens, maybe hundreds of volunteers to do voice acting or audio for the game. And we've had to turn all of them down because the problem is, if you have 50 different actors, each in their own home studio with different street noises outside and different levels of sound reproduction and different skill levels, and without anyone actually in there directing them, you're going to get a mishmash of a game. You really need to do that professional approach going into a studio. Maybe not so much today. A lot of people have professional home studios, but certainly when we were doing it, being in the same Hollywood studio for every voice, and doing it on a completely professional level, you get the best out of people. And it's really hard to get that level of expressiveness from amateur actors that are, spread all over the place. And so we said, basically, we don't have the skill to do that. It's also a little issue that we're still writing dialogue today. 5.25, almost 5.5 years since the Kickstarter. We're getting feedback from our alpha testers and saying, we really need to add more dialogue to fill out that sequence. It doesn't quite work. And so when's the voice recording going to be done? Well, if the text version is really successful, maybe in a few months, it says crazy.
No.
Stick to your guns.
I would love to hear these voices voiced, but it would be a major undertaking just to do that.
Well, and sometimes the voice, like, it added something. I noticed a lot in the Quest for Glory 4, they would kind of vary from what the script said a little, especially with like the farmers particularly. They just went completely off script sometimes. It just kind of funny.
Yeah, that one particular sequence is kind of famous, Hans, Franz, and Yvonne. And what happened there is that Stu decided the best way to record that line was to get all three of those actors in the studio at the same time. And get them to play off each other. He said, maybe it would be fun to do celebrity impersonation voices for this. So we said, okay, what voices do you do? And the one guy said, I do a Jack Nicholson, did one of the lines Jack Nicholson. And the other guy said, I do a Jack Nicholson too. And I said, well, we can't have two Jack Nicholsons. Well, except they're different. They're just, they kind of give the feeling by having two different Jack Nicholsons with slightly different voices. We gave the idea of people that are maybe brothers, that are, farmers, all living in this very isolated community.
Mind you, I was not here at the time.
She would have said no. Then they just started, what was our third voice? I don't remember.
It was
Rodney Dangerfield.
Rodney Dangerfield.
Rodney Dangerfield. So we had two Jack Nicholsons and Rodney Dangerfield for the three actors. And they started reading the script, and they were doing a really good job. And the one guy said, how tight is this? Do you mind if I ad-lib a little bit? And I said, well, give it a try. Let's see what we get. And they started going crazy with all the the stinky people, because we were talking about, needing garlic to ward off the vampires and so on.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was hilarious, and Laurie wasn't there to stop me, so we went with it, and we decided not to change the original text in the game. We left the text in.
And I thought that was near.
Yeah. And it makes a great Easter egg, because people have discovered this over the years, and they're like, wait a second, they're not saying the lines that are on the screen.
Yeah. So one more question, I guess, on Quest for Glory 5. This is just something I've always wondered. Why couldn't you save Katrina and Arana?
Because this is a dramatic moment. This is the kind of thing of once upon a time somebody asked, can a game design actually make you cry? Can you get so involved with a game that you can't separate your emotions from the game? And in the course of our games, all of our games, we tried to make the player actually have, moments of true dilemma of trying to figure out what you can do, because you don't have all the choices in the world. You have to choose. And it's this mental involvement because it makes you uncomfortable having to make a sole choice, knowing that you're condemning the other to whatever kind of fate Hades has set for it. And so therefore you remember that moment more than anything else. It isn't a happy moment. Games don't have to all be light and joy and funny bunnies. There are moments where you have this mental anguish of and the joy of actually accomplishing something in it, but you remember that moment because you had to make a critical decision, and it wasn't a good decision you had to make. So like life, that becomes a meaningful thing you will never forget.
So Laurie's job is to be the serious storyteller. My job is to completely spoil the moment and come up with something entirely silly so that the player, as they're at this level of stress and tension and, oh my God, finally gets to breathe.
Yeah.
It's all a roller coaster ride. Here's the silly, well, not even fun. It's really silly. It just breaks the tension so they can go on with breathing and living. Can a game make you cry? Clearly, yes. Quest for Glory 4 the scene that Laurie wrote with the little girl Tanya, the little vampire girl, and her pet monster Toby. I cried when I played it, and lots of fans have said that. We do get, every time we have something where you have to make a choice that people don't like, we do get letters in from people that said, why did we have to do this? I didn't want to, have to make the tough decision. And we said, but, without it, there's no drama. There's no sense of accomplishment or involvement in the story. It has to be there.
Just likewise, everybody wanted, Quest for Glory 6, 7, 8, onward and onward, a sequel after a sequel. And we designed that game to close the sequence, to have the hero in the course of 5 games actually have a happily ever after. He gets to accomplish what he's gotten to do, and then the world is better for it. It doesn't suddenly become a horrible place again that has to go out and fix. It's like there should be a reward. There should be a conclusion. Everything should come together. Everything should make sense, because that's human beings love stories. We want to have a story come to a conclusion. And yes, we might want to play it all over again and have a new experience, but that hero gets to have his reward. You don't just keep dragging him out. It isn't a comic book world where, the world has gone to hell again.
And the player gets to get to a conclusion, too. The player gets to say, okay, yes, this is a satisfying ending. I've done what needed to be done. I am a hero.
Yes.
And it's not just the character that's the hero, it's the player that becomes the hero. We want you to feel that these games matter, that they have a meaning. And even if they are just pixels on a screen, while you're involved in them, it's you out there.
We did promise that was the last question, right? Just as like a way of a wrap up, what's next for you after Hero U is released, other than getting all those voice actors into it? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it really depends on a lot of things. For Hero U itself, we did it for PC and Mac and Linux. We're going to do simultaneous release on those, hopefully. We have some problems on squarish, old-fashioned 4:3 ratio monitors. So game is really designed for widescreen 16:9. So we'll probably go through and do some patches at some point to make it. It's just some of the user interfaces everything will work, but it won't look as good. So we want to make those look better on that. We're probably going to convert to some consoles. Got a lot of requests to come out with a Nintendo Switch release of it, and possibly PS4 and Xbox One. We've had a lot of requests for tablets, but unfortunately the tablet market is such that we can't practically do a tablet version for probably a year. And that's just a marketing thing. But I think we're going to have some bugs that will be discovered. Sierra, we used to joke about the players or the gamma testers, or the alpha, beta, and the gamma test. Once it goes out into the wild, they always find things that nobody found while we were testing it. So we'll be fixing that. Meanwhile, we will be doing design work for the next game. There's Hero U2 Wizard's Way that's going to be the same setting, but now you're going to be a wizard character instead of a rogue character. All within the same universe, but new stories, new characters. Meanwhile, in the multi-ring circus, we'll probably be doing some publicity things of going around to various places. We have some really mundane fulfillment stuff to do. We have to get boxes out to people that ordered box copies. We have a major backer in Germany that we promised to visit as one of his Kickstarter rewards. We've got other people that we're supposed to have online conferences with that we should have done 3 years ago. So we've got a lot of fulfillment stuff to do. And then meanwhile, we'll be watching the sales of the game. So we funded about $400,000 of the game costs on the 2 Kickstarter campaigns we did. The games actually cost us close to $1.5 million. So somehow we have to recoup some of that expense. And if the game doesn't sell at all, then it would be pretty silly. There's an old joke about the guy that was selling cars for $1,000 less than wholesale. And they said, how's this work? And the guy says, well, I lose money on every sale, but I'll make it up in quantity. So we can't afford to do that. We can't afford to keep on making games if we lose money on every one. But if the game, breaks even or does a little bit better, then, for one thing, we're going to go back to our 30 or so developers, and everybody will, get some of that reward. This isn't about making us rich. It's about, as Laurie said, we started this out in desperation because we were broke. And for us, and now we're even more broke. In theory, this is supposed to make a living for us, and we wanted to make it a good living for all the developers that have been such an integral part of this along the way. And then we'll see. Hopefully, we'll be able to make Wizard's Way and the rest of the series. It's projected as another 5-game series along the lines of Quest for Glory. The 5th game is a big mystery, but we know what it is, but mystery that we're not revealing yet. But the first 4 games are the Rogue, the Wizard, 3rd one is the Warrior, and then the Paladin?
Yep.
Paladin in game 4. 5th game, mystery game.
Well, fifth game will be multi-character.
Oh, she's revealed the mystery.
Yes,
every one of the characters that you played will come back, and you'll be able to switch between them to some extent.
When we figure it out, yes.
Once we figure out how to do it. Lucas,
and hopefully they don't take 5 years between each thing, because that makes it a little long, Yeah,
we think we've learned a few things here. We think we can make each of the games in probably 2 to 3 years after this, but they're not going to be 1 year. You need that much time for the writing to percolate. I mentioned the lock-picking puzzle that, we spent 6 months on and still weren't satisfied with it. If you don't have that physical passage of time, you can't play with things. You can't experiment.
Somebody asked about whether or not we enjoyed playing our games, and I've never enjoyed playing any of my other games for Sierra, but that's because you've sort of got...
There was never time.
There was never time. There was never any time in the process, because it was really, it's done, ship. In our case, we're having the luxury of having this long test period where I can go in and say, okay, that doesn't look right. Well, I can fix it. It doesn't have to be stuck with lousy something that bugs me. So I can make things right. And that's a wonderful experience of knowing that you can keep making it better.
Yeah, I announced the alpha testing process for this game almost exactly 1 year ago, March 2017. And we were expecting by June we would be in full testing. And it actually took 5 months to work out how we were going to do bug reporting, how we were going to get this out to people, getting a web page up, who we were going to invite to the initial alpha test, all that. So August was when we finally started testing and went full bore in September. And now 6 months later, we are still in alpha testing. And all that time has been spent taking the feedback from the players and reworking sections of the game and also finishing the game because we didn't give them the entire game initially. But it's that degree of refinement. That's a luxury we never had at Sierra. We had Sierra wanting to ship games that actually could not be completed. Was it Quest for Glory 4? Quest for Glory 5? I had to basically resign the company in order to take a vacation because the game was supposed to ship in. I think June of '98, and we had everything on schedule for that. And then top management finally started actually playing the game and demanding major changes and going back into the studio, re-recording voices and changing the combat system and all kinds of stuff. And it just kept stretching out. And my Thanksgiving vacation, I said, I'm going in that regardless. And they said, well, then don't bother coming back. So that was the way it worked on that one. That was a rarity. All the previous games had at most a month of testing. Some of them had a week and then shipped out the door. And Quest for Glory 2, you could not become a paladin the way they were about to ship the game. And there was a bug because everybody who had played one section of the game. We had ways of saying, okay, jump to day 35 of the game or whatever, and they would test from that point forward. Nobody on the quality assurance staff had actually played the game through from beginning to end. And when they did, they discovered that there was some circular logic in there that made it impossible to ever become a paladin. So fortunately, an unrelated systems problem delayed the release, and I played it through from beginning to end and said, this doesn't work. And we got that fixed, fortunately, before shipment. And, little stuff like that. So this game, we've really had the luxury of spending 6 months on testing. We're going to go into beta testing in 2 to 3 weeks. And then after that, we're, about a month later, we plan to release the game. So around the end of April.
Awesome.
And based on every estimate I've made so far, anyone clever would say, okay, it's going to slip past that. Not this time.
And the place for people to go who want to get that now, it's www.hero-u.com, right?
That's correct.
Perfect.
And we don't keep that super up to date. The other place you should go is we have a link to it from there. There's a link on HeroU.com that links to our one of our Kickstarter pages. So we're approaching 100 project updates on the original Kickstarter page, and they all have more information about the game and a lot of pictures from it, and you can really get a feeling for what this thing is going to be. And there's a couple old playable demos from I think from 2015 up on the Hero U page, so you can play a little bit and get an idea of the combat. We hope players will love the game as much or more than they did Quest for Glory, because this is a 21st century improved redo of a new Quest for Glory.
Quest for Glory for me was just like in my teen years, played like dozens of times each game. It was just loved it. So it was really, really a pleasure to get to talk to you guys.
Oh, great. We're glad to hear that.
Thank you very much again, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great.
Sure thing.
Well, we know this is quite a long episode, right? So I think we're keeping the Q&A a little bit shorter today. We don't really have any, it's more kind of business-related questions rather than let's answer a fun question about grandfather clocks or something like we did last week. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with Cody Swisher's question. I have YouTube Red. Do you still get paid for my views?
Yes.
He was on the podcast. Yes, when we post it on podcast, although it would be better if you listened on iTunes or Google Play.
This was a question in relation to the podcast. Okay, because I did feel it was a bit obvious, like with the, do you get paid for my YouTube? Yes, we do.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Yeah.
This was on the video, and this is something I think we've discussed before. But so you have YouTube Red, and so it's sort of a side topic on here connected. And so a lot of people complain, so we have those in-video ads, right? And so if you have YouTube Red, you're still seeing that in-video ad.
We should say, rather than, because in video could also mean like mid-roll ads that YouTube puts in, but we like an integration where we talk about, got the hymns letter on my desk or Skillshare or any of these guys.
Yeah, exactly. So I we've talked about this before, where it's like we'd like to filter these out, right? And so I think one way to do it, which YouTube should do, and I don't know why they don't, because it would be really easy, is if we could mark this like at the start and the finish of the ad, and then like in the system, so we do that, and then they could automatically filter it out for YouTube Red people.
That's a good idea.
If the YouTube Red people would just, they could have an option like a little checkbox. Do they want to auto filter these, or do they want to see? Because I mean, some people do them really entertaining sometimes, and so the person could select. YouTube could automatically filter it out, and then it would resolve this issue for the YouTube Red.
That's a good point. I don't know why they do that. For YouTube, they're not losing anything by doing that. I mean, it might be that the advertisers will want to pay us slightly less because we'd be losing a small... But I mean, it's only a small percentage of people who have YouTube Red, so...
No, what is it, like 5% maybe?
Yeah, so maybe they'd pay us 5%. But then we'd just have to hit a bigger view target. It's not really...
It's not... Yeah. And I feel like this is really
just
simple.
A good idea, yeah.
This would not be hard for them to, one programmer who works on it for like a couple days, and then probably after that have like a week or two of testing, and then start rolling it out to a few, for testing, and then done. Like, it's a very simple solution, easy for us to do, because we can just literally put in the mark start and done. It skips it for YouTube Red.
Yeah, they already have this kind of stuff set up for when you put in mid-roll ad in, you can drag, or like when you're making a little edit to a video, they have all this, a back-end editing thing where you can mark things in videos. So I'm sure it's a very easy thing to do. Yes, so no, we can't do anything like that, but if YouTube implement that feature, well, we will.
That would be great.
Yeah. There you go. If you're listening, YouTube, get engineer someone working on this. Just two questions today. Sonza68 says, is there a you put this in. I did see this one before. Is there a forum where we could discuss the podcast topics? Now, I'm going to run with the assumption that, because this was posted on the podcast where we talk a lot about the forum, that he is being facetious there, or she is being facetious.
Or she,
yeah.
Turns out, yes, there is. Sonza68, thanks for asking.
What a convenient way to end this episode of BrainFood.
Which is probably, how long do you suppose this one's going to be? Like 2.5 hours? 2:20 maybe?
I tend not to look at the clock, because then I find myself being too clock focused. But let me see. 45, 20. I'd say it could be at least 2 hours, this one, with the interview, because that interview ran.
And I love that. And like that was really interesting. I thought they had a lot of interesting stuff to say. And I love how they just like kept talking and like answering the questions without us even having to ask. And it was just like it's the easiest interview ever.
Wonderfully easy to interview, yeah.
Yeah, and just what they had to say was like super interesting. I'm like sitting there like, well, this is just fascinating, through the whole thing. So that was great.
Yeah, it was perfect, easy to do. I really hope everyone listening enjoyed it. If you do want to discuss that interview, you know where to go. forums.todayifoundout.com. Check that out. Anything else you wanted to add before? I guess this is kind of wrapped up for this week.
Next week, I think, for Wheezy Waiter. Stay tuned, right?
Absolutely. No, week after. Next week will be a regular practical knowledge section, unless I'm really getting my dates confused. I
think you're behind.
Yes, that will be next week.
It is quite confusing because, we haven't even published episode 3. This is episode 4, and we've already arranged everything for episode 5.
Forgive me, listeners. I am easily confused. My brain has been altered by the presence of chemicals and wood chip powder in my apartment. So there you have it. Although the floor does look great, I'm very satisfied with this. I can share a picture in the show notes. It's so exciting. It's not exciting, but it's a good looking floor.